There's an interesting moment in the manifesto of the Unabomber. If you don't know who the Unabomber was and who the Unabomber is, he's a former university professor who's now been in prison for many, many years. Uh, there's a moment in his own manifesto in which he reflects nobody would have paid attention to us. Nobody would have cared about our political perspective if we hadn't started killing people. Now, the element of deception here is that throughout his manifesto and throughout that phase of his career as a terrorist, frankly, he pretended that he represented a large group of people or some kind of organized political party or faction. His early messages as a terrorist were always signed FC. You might think that stands for football club, but it stood for Freedom Club. He represented himself as a club of people, and he was one man entirely alone. There was never even one other member, one other acolyte, one other follower. However, so in one sense, what he was writing to the authorities in these letters was intentionally deceptive and misleading. But there's also something unusually honest in him saying that nobody would have ever cared about his manifesto. No one would have cared about his philosophy. Nobody would have cared about his politics if he had not started killing people, not just violence in a vague sense, but specifically murdering people. Now, when you look back at the last 20 years of what happened in the vegan movement, and you look ahead to the next 20 years of the vegan movement, it's remarkable that we as vegans aren't thought of that way, right? Like, it's amazing that nobody or nobody with a high enough public profile, nobody notorious enough in the news and the press has taken that step that you've seen Gary Yourofsky hint at again and again, that there's something inevitable to vegans actually taking up arms, taking up guns, holding people at gunpoint and demanding that they close down slaughterhouses or so on and so forth. Now, of course, I'm the last person to say that veganism has no history of terrorism whatsoever. I've discussed many strange examples on my channel. However, it's fair to say that the incel movement, incels, the whole political discourse around incels would not exist if they had not started killing people, right? Whereas veganism has not been tainted in this way. It's not thought of in this way yet. Now, those of you who have been in the vegan movement for 5 years or 10 years, you might remember there was one news story that came out of France. This is now closer to 10 years ago. From memory, it's 9 years ago, something like that. There was one news story in France of parents who malnourished their own baby, and social services got involved, and the parents were vegan. Now, I remember responding to this on my blog before I even had a YouTube channel, and I pointed out that very few of the journalists commenting on this had even read the judge's decision, which I read in French. My French was not great, but I could still read and understand that in French. And I remember quoting that and talking about it on my blog. This was before I had a YouTube channel, so only 9 years ago. That was one case of what I would presume would be one pair of very eccentric hippie parents who were malnourishing their child. And the judge himself said, a vegetarian diet is not on trial here, really meaning a vegan diet is not on trial here. The judge probably didn't know the difference. The nutritional adequacy of a vegan diet is not on trial here. This is just about two parents who happen to be incompetent or irresponsible, and how we deal with that as a society, how we deal with that as a legal system, as a childcare system, so on and so forth. But I've got to tell you, I mean, for at least 5 years, but probably it's more like 10 years, that one case that went to court and what the press said about it, it created a cloud over veganism, not just in France, but in America, like to my knowledge, around the world. Maybe it wasn't that influential in India or China, I don't know. But that this one case, and those aren't people who decided to become violent. So when you look at a phenomenon like the incel phenomenon, to my knowledge, there were really just two incel killers. No, maybe I can think of a third. But anyway, there were two instances that were really covered in the press that really, got tremendous attention publicly, both in the United States of America, of guys who publicly and directly identified as incel killers. people killing for this movement, killing for this ideology, killing due to this kind of social analysis or complaint, But it's not based on a complaint that they personally as individuals can't get laid. It's based on an analysis of our society and a claim that society has to change to suit them. It is in this sense a political movement. It's not a religious movement. It is a political movement, even if it's a political movement we all despise. But it's a political movement whose prominence and political significance has entirely relied on the massacre. Now, this is challenging, and we're thinking about many different angles for many different reasons. So, one of the most notorious was this guy who was obviously mentally retarded in Toronto. The one in California, he was diagnosed as having autism. So, in case you don't know, autism is a form of mental retardation. So, definitionally, this person is mentally retarded. The guy in Toronto, you can just watch the police interviewing him, and you can come to your own conclusion of whether or not you would include him in your definition of mentally retarded. I am telling you I would. And if you're really doubting this, fair enough in a sense. Who gets to define who's mentally retarded and who doesn't? Well, what if you had been in grade school with this guy? What if he had been with you in grade 6? What if he had been with you in math class? Now, I wasn't the best student in math myself in grade 6, but what my teachers said to me again and again, and many of them were furious with me, was, look, you're too smart for this. You're brilliant. You're gifted. You're one of the best students. But I can't motivate you to care about math. Like, you're sloppy and you don't care. You're not trying your hardest. Completely true. I didn't care about doing well in math in grade school. But there were other kids the teachers didn't get angry with. I was intelligent and I just didn't care. I wasn't trying hard. Whatever you want to say about me as math. There were kids where the whole tone of discourse of the teacher was totally different. It's like, oh, we got to bring in a specialist. Oh, we got to help this kid. Oh, this kid can't do math, and it's on a whole different level. This is actually mental retardation. This is actually a learning disability or impairment. And the teachers don't even get angry at those kids. There's no point yelling at them. And, at least at my school, they'd call in someone. There were different. Anyway, I have specific memories of this from my own childhood. You may not remember your childhood that precisely, but my point is, if you look at these guys and even just look at film clips of them talking into the camera, as I said, that police interrogation, I think, is very telling. And then you imagine, what if I had been in school with this guy in grade 6? Well, maybe he wouldn't have been in the same classroom as you at all, or maybe you acknowledge this would be one of the quote unquote special needs kids. This is someone who would need that kind of help. Okay. This is my point. We're all living through this period of time of phony optimism about nonviolence in politics, right? Oh, we're all so optimistic that we're going to end global warming by having physically attractive young women in bikinis, holding up a sign on a sidewalk. This is how history is made, guys. This is going to change the fate of nations. This is going to change the political priorities in our leaders. Boris Johnson is sitting there going, damn, that's a good-looking woman in a bikini holding up a sign. I think I should make fur illegal. This is what you think. And all those good-looking women in bikinis who called for the end of the war in Afghanistan. And I'm using this broadly to just indicate all the ridiculous things people do in the name of nonviolence and street activism. It isn't all good-looking women in bikinis, but there's plenty of that to go around. Oh, how effective was that? After just 19 and a half years, the women in bikinis had their way. The nonviolent street protesters, the PETA-style activism, all this bullshit, all this hand-wringing and heart-bleeding, all this. Oh, gee, after 19 and a half years, you ended the war in Afghanistan. And look how it ended. And look what a better place the world is. Oh, gee, you got your way. And, look, guys, in case you don't know, a longtime viewer of the channel, you may or may not be here now, but Oliver, who also has his own YouTube channel, Oliver Shields has his own YouTube channel, which I support. I share links to periodically. He said to me just in passing a few days ago, he said, how much has the philosophy of Azil Mazard changed in 6 years? And I don't know how he took it, but I said to him, from my perspective, I was being warm. I said, look, dude, you know, like if anyone knows, you know, like he could give an interview about how much my political philosophy has changed in 6 years because he's been watching the YouTube channel for at least 5 years. I don't know, 5 or 6 years. It's like, dude, you know how my views have changed. Well, look, I mean, I was there. I'm forgetting if it was during the year 2001 or just at the beginning of 2002, but I marched in the anti-war protests at that time. So again, I just forget, it's September 11th, 2001, and then October, November, December. I would guess it was just over the line into 2002, but there were peace protests at that time, non-violent peace protests that set records for many cities around the world. It was the largest protest of any kind, largest street protest, largest political demonstration they'd ever had in the history of the Western world. And I think those records still stand. I mean, here we are more than 20 years later, and there hasn't been a bigger protest. So there were people saying, hey, we don't want to invade Afghanistan. We don't want to invade Iraq. No, I've changed. I mean, the man I am today, I would have signed up to join the army. I say, though, including my ignorance. Like the other problem is, sorry, don't worry, this is just a digression. If you really understand how stupid George W. Bush was, are you willing to be in an army under the command of George W. Bush? That's a very difficult question. And it probably wouldn't have been the American army. I probably would have joined the French army or the British army. I would have joined some other army and gone to fight where you don't distrust your leadership. And by the way, long story short, I do blame George W. Bush, the stupidity of George W. Bush and Barack Obama. That's why those wars went the way they did. All right. But here's my point. Consider the political efficacy of just two men who engaged in massacres and what they've done for the incredibly unpopular incel movement, the political significance in our times of the incel movement. Consider the efficacy of the Unabomber. And again, with all humility, he said, look, nobody would have ever taken an interest in his philosophy. Nobody would have ever taken an interest in what he has to say politically if he hadn't started killing people. Okay, so you look at that, and then you look at the anti-war movement, and look at any other example. There's a kind of pro-solar power movement. You guys have probably seen it. There are any number of kind of peaceful street protest-based movements. There's an anti-fur movement. There's a pro-vegan movement. I don't feel it so much right now because the type of people who would engage in terrorism don't talk to me anymore. They know I'm anti-terrorism. Like in this sense, I'm anti-violence and I'm trying to extricate political movements like veganism. Like, I want veganism to be a legitimate democratic movement, in my opinion, in the same way the gay rights movement was. Now, look, I don't know. Can you guys, maybe there were some gay rights terrorists. Like, I legitimately do not remember anyone engaging in a massacre in the name of gay rights. It would be understandable, frankly. Like, gay rights it's still this day in Muslim countries, for example, but in some Christian countries, status homosexuals is so bad. Like, you could, I could understand gay people getting to that limit where they really want to engage in terrorism. But, I say again and again, look, if we're really going to accomplish something in veganism, it has to be kind of democratically legitimate. It has to be scientifically legitimate. Like, there are different kinds of legitimacy that we really need to build up that basis. And I also talk a lot about the life of a creative artist, the way in which we have to do things that are really creative and really entertaining. We have to make our own Bambi. We have to make our own animated movie that gets this message across to adults and children, that parents and children watch a movie that makes the case. There are a lot of things we have to do, in my opinion, and in terms of my argument, and I even in countries that don't have democracy, like if you're talking about communist China or something, to think the path of violence is the way to promote veganism within communist China, I'm just being honest with you, it seems to me fundamentally stupid. So I just say, in terms of how I feel about this issue, now for many years, other vegans have known that I'm anti-terrorism and anti-violence. So I don't hear from those people anymore. But when I'd first started the YouTube channel, I did feel it because I did hear from those people. And I felt like we were sitting on a powder keg. I felt like we were sitting on a time bomb where it's like, well, the clock is ticking. And sooner or later, in the same way that one person shapes the public perception of incels, that you have an incel killer that gets this into the headlines, so on. In the same way, like the clock is ticking, and then there's going to be a vegan killer, And then everyone's going to see vegans this way, at least for 5 years, maybe 10 years, maybe 100 years, where the meaning of veganism politically will be changed forever by the violent act of just one man. Now, some of you remember there was a guy, was it in Hungary or was it in the Ukraine? There was one guy in Eastern Europe. Someone in the comments will remember. There was one guy and he took people hostage on a bus. So he didn't kill anyone, but that was close. And he demanded on the bus, he demanded that the prime minister or president of that country make a statement in support of veganism. And then he let the hostages go on the bus. So some of you will remember that. I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm remembering that as if that were Ukraine, but maybe I just have Ukraine on the brain because Ukraine's in the news so much lately. But somewhere in Eastern Europe, and it wasn't Russia. I don't think in Russia they would have tolerated that. And the guy ended up in jail, and that was in the newspaper headlines briefly, and then disappeared. Well, what if the next time? What if it's someone who does exactly what Gary Yourofsky encouraged vegans to do? And I've played that clip a million times, where he was talking about holding people. Someone in the audience says, sounds like Chechnya. Wasn't Chechnya. Okay, incels are a movement nobody sympathizes with. Nobody thinks their perspective matters. Nobody thinks they have something positive to contribute to the reform of our society. Put it that way, to political progress or the political transformation of our society in future. Not even 1% of the population would agree with incels. Like if you tried to set out the incel manifesto and then poll people, say how much do you agree with this? And we live in a society where more than 1% of people agree with Sharia law. Okay, more than 1% of people agree with hardcore Catholic and Christian notions about what's there are a lot of unpopular philosophies that pull in more than 1%. Okay, now again, I think if you were honest with yourself, if you set out a vegan manifesto that was really honest about the world vegans want to live in, no more pet dogs, no more pet cats, no more hot dogs, no more hamburgers, right? It's not just, if you poll just on the issue of fur coats, more than 1% of people say, okay, we can do with it fur coats. How about leather basketball shoes? You want to go to New York City and poll people and say, yeah, we're going to make it illegal for you to ever wear or own Nike Air Force Ones again, to ever wear leather basketball shoes, leather high heels, leather purses. All right, if you actually spell out for people what a vegan society is going to mean, vegan legal reforms are going to mean, it's less than 1%, right? Fewer than 1% of people would support those reforms. So you see, there's something comparable here. But this totally unpopular, totally despicable political movement, incels. And look, let me just say a little bit more about despicable. There was a time when people responded to homosexuals with horror, with revulsion. And this was really even encouraged. These people were regarded as disgusting, and that they made your skin crawl just to have them on the news and so on. And there was a process. And look, I do think that partly just reflects the culture we had on television and radio and movies before that. Now, I'd say this also, still to this day, it's very rare to see someone with a disability on camera at all. And it's especially rare to see someone with a facially visible disability. Like if there's someone in a wheelchair, they still look like a movie star from the waist up, and it just comes up in different contexts, conversation with my girlfriend and stuff. People don't know what it's like to have a face-to-face conversation with someone whose face is really kind of ugly and malformed, and maybe they're twitching, maybe they have other problems, because they really grow up watching television where the ugly people, like the actors who play the ugly role on television, they're plain, but they're fundamentally good-looking, healthy people. And you don't know what it's like to spend time around, really hideous people. I'm just saying, like that's something you're used to. And, if you actually get involved in humanitarian work, if you actually get involved with caring for the sick and the downtrodden and the poor, if you actually, I've described this before, being in Cambodia for me, and for the first time having a conversation with someone whose face was caved in by a bomb, This guy had a seriously deformed face. People who are, horribly mangled by bullets and bombs, and you get used to it. And the good news is you really do. I had a coworker; he had a deformed face just due to a type of birthmark. It was just a birth abnormality, and I got used to it quick. I'm just telling you honestly. Maybe the third day I was at work, he looked totally normal to me. But like the first time you meet, you're like, ugh, you're just not used to looking at someone. Okay, well, look, you know what? We had to fucking grow up as a society. We had to really accept gay people as normal. And, there's a little bit of push and pull on both sides there. But, talking to an openly effeminate gay man, a gay man who doesn't try to act straight, and seeing that on TV, listening to them as a news broadcaster or whatever other role, seeing them interviewed on the news, hearing and caring about the perspective of gay people, and having a kind of mature response to how these people talk and act, and not demanding that they live up to our expectations for what's normal. So I feel within my lifetime, I'm in my mid 40s, by the way, I've seen that change in the Western world where gay people went from being pariahs, to use a loaded term, to really being accepted, even by their critics. Like there's a level on which it's not cool anymore to be freaked out or disgusted by gay people and their appearance and their behavior. You accept, and by the way, I'm not claiming all gay men are effeminate. I know there's all kinds of ways to be gay, but obviously, the real conflict is with gay men who in their appearance or behavior are very obviously not straight, are very obviously not behaving the way we would expect a straight person to. So that's why I'm mentioning effeminate gay men specifically. Obviously with lesbians, we could repeat this whole discourse. Some women you can't even tell that you can know a woman for years. She doesn't mention she's a lesbian. You can't tell. But there are some women, and the first day you meet them, you know. Same with vegans, by the way. You cannot know someone's vegan. And there are some people, for the first day you meet them, they're vegan. So I'm just saying, this kind of revulsion, this kind of judgment, it's not built into the equation. It's not an automatic or default. Like there isn't a cause and effect relationship that exists like an equation in physics, that's established and remains the same forever and ever. Instead, on the contrary, how we react to these things, it's culturally conditioned, but it also reflects a kind of moral commitment on our part, right? But when you look in the faces of these incels, right, you feel a kind of revulsion. Like even on YouTube, it's not just that their ideology is despicable and revolting. They are despicable and revolting. These are exactly the people we want to ignore and don't want to listen to. And so it's very rare to write anything down, but I have a few points I want to go over here. Lurking behind this, to a massive extent, and it's just some interesting comments coming in. So I'll just disagree. Micah Wright says, "Welcome to the audience, Micah. I don't remember you being here before." Micah says, "Incels mostly result from inherent issues with hookup cultures. Incels see dating as a game or a challenge to overcome rather than organic means by which to learn who someone is. The issue with hookup culture is that it's inherently shallow." Okay, so I'm taking a totally different approach here. Like I'm not saying that what you've just said is false or totally irrelevant or something, but just notice the way I'm approaching this, the way in which it's different. I saw a YouTube channel almost at random the other day. I was searching for something and I ended up seeing this YouTube channel. And this guy is 6'4", and he considers himself ugly. He claims his analysis of his situation is that he is an incel. Oh, sorry, and I should clarify that. It's not that he's an incel. It's just that no women want him. I'll say why in a moment. He can't get laid. He can't get a girlfriend. He can't have any. He claims that it's because he has an ugly face. And interestingly, his cross to bear, and one of the reasons he created his YouTube channel, was he was complaining that the incels all think that height is the reason why they can't get laid. Like they say, oh, our society's prejudiced against short men. Short men can't. And he said, well, he's 6'4", and he's saying, no, the reality is just that he has an ugly face, and that's enough to ruin your life in a study. That, sorry, let's get rid of this sponge. So the sponge was kind of sticking out of the side of my head. So he was making the argument that no, being tall isn't enough. He's tall, and he still has all these problems. And the reason why I didn't call him an incel was, hilariously, this guy hit a turning point in his life where he rejected incel ideology And he instead embraced quote unquote black pill ideology. And he said, look, he really feels that as a philosophy, the incels are wrong. And that the reality is that he is just a guy who's too ugly to get laid. Now, I could show you this guy's picture right now. I could show you, and he doesn't have an ugly face. He does not. It is 100% a self-justification and a delusion for him to think it's because he has an ugly face. And I'm not claiming nobody is in that situation. I saw a YouTube channel really at random about a week ago, and it's just very rare to see this. It was a guy who had a hideously deformed face, really. Like one of his eyeballs was down where the middle of my cheekbone is. His whole face, I mean, he was just born that way. It's not his fault. And it was obvious. I mean, he'd had reconstructive surgery when he was a baby. So obviously his face had been even worse, and surgeons had tried to make it work. But I mean, that guy had a horrifying face. Not his fault. It's not ethical. He was born with a really deformed face. There are some people for whom you say, well, look, it's your face. Your face is terrifying to people. So obviously it's going to be really hard for you to have a relationship with. That exists. I'm saying this particular guy who is 6'4", if you click on any of these videos, say, no, the problem isn't that you're ugly. It's not that you have an ugly face. The problem is that you're stupid. Right? And I see the whole incel discourse, the whole thing, as a cope for dealing with stupidity and even outright retardation. That a lot of these people are mentally disabled. And that's why women don't want them. And that's why they can't speak in complete sentences. The whole discourse about social skills is a cope, right? So I'll just digress on this briefly, but I think this is useful and, useful for Micah Wright or many people in the audience. And you, again, Micah, I'm not saying what you're saying. I'm not rejecting or even disagreeing with what you're saying. I'm emphasizing the extent to which my approach is different from yours. But some aspects of the problem would be elucidated by, would be, explained by the approach you're taking. But I have a very different analytical approach. All right, sorry, I have a lot to say. It's the question of what order I'm going to say it. Self-pity and being self-pitying. Unfortunately, in English, these are really used as insults. You denigrate someone or you dismiss what they have to say by reproaching them for being self-pitying. I mean, in English, if you say to someone, you're just feeling sorry for yourself, that's it totally dismisses what it means. That what they're saying is of no reality, is of no significance. It shouldn't, but it does. That's our culture and that's our language. If you characterize anyone, whether it's a politician or a celebrity or your own friend or relative, if you say to them, you are self-pitying, it dismisses them. If they tell you about their problems and then you say, what you've just said to me is self-pitying, it dismisses the substance of what they say. And I think self-pity, there are really at least two very different concepts that are masked and misrepresented by our language, by our cultural tradition. What could be more important and what could be more meaningful in instigating personal and even political change than self-pity, than sitting down and feeling sorry for yourself, sitting down and reflecting on how terrible your situation is in life. And I would just point out, somebody else feeling sorry for you can never be a substitute for that. Like, my relationship with my mom is not that close. But back when I was in university, there's no way my mother feeling sorry for me can have the effect or significance of me sitting down and feeling sorry for myself. Like, here I am in university. The university is terrible. The quality of education is terrible. The other students I'm in class with are terrible. My professors are terrible. I have no hope for the future. I have no plans for the future. No possible career in front of me. It was a really bleak, really terrible time in my life. My mom didn't feel sorry for me. She didn't understand. She wasn't capable of understanding. And if I tried to talk about these things, which I didn't do, but once in a while she'd kind of start a conversation with me on her own terms. It wasn't me with her. She'd talk to me about what going to university was like in the 1960s. Okay. And she'd be like, oh, well, when I was in university and I was writing articles for the newspaper and I was doing this, I have a YouTube video on this channel of my mom talking about her time in university. So in case, if you want to hear her perspective about how wonderful her time in university was. Now, I can tell you something else. I know my mom real well. She learned nothing while she was in university. She came out of university just as ignorant as she went in. The level of erudition my mother had by the end of her university education, it was zero. So she might have had a lot of fun in going to university in the 1960s. Everything was so different, significance of university or society and what kind of job you could leave to and everything else. And whether or not you could even get employed with it, everything's different. I just say this is a good example because who else could you have in your life who's going to feel sorry for you? Now, it wasn't the situation. My mother never felt sorry for me. But like in theory, you can imagine a parallel reality where my mother comes to me and says, look, I can see you're really suffering. I can see you're really down. Like there must be something really wrong with your situation at university. And I feel bad about you. And let's talk about what you're going to do about it, what you can do to change it. With my mother, this never happened. Never. And I hope some of you have mothers who are that involved in your life. So going to continue here. So we have a comment from a guy named Your Brain. Don't remember you. I'm sorry, but I don't know if you got the hint, but you can't really come into my live stream and expect me to completely change the topic of the video. So I'm not offended, but a lot of people are interested in a lot of different topics. Everyone laughed out loud once in the middle of a live stream on some totally different subject. Someone came in and said, hey, why don't you make any videos talking about cat ownership? Talking about owning cats as pets. I think everyone in the audience was laughing. They're like, oh my God, he's already made videos about that. Okay. Again, I wasn't offended, but it was like, guys, I forget what we were talking about. We're talking about Joe Biden and the war in China or something. We're talking about some totally different thing. But, yes, someone here is laughing again, saying, ha, 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 I remember that live stream. So again, I'm not offended. I'm not angry. But, the audience is welcome to contribute to the discussion and to state opinions that are the opposite of mine, that are on topic. But if someone is talking about something that's totally unrelated, I'm probably just going to ignore it. I mean, there's really just no point. So, I've said many times, sympathy is an analytical tool, and I'd ask you to sympathize my position. I don't know if you've ever been a broadcaster. I don't know if you've ever done a live stream, but it's just ridiculous to come into a conversation and ask me to talk about something totally unrelated, even if it is something that interested me. I mean, like I'm interested in the politics and ethics of pet ownership and castrating cats and so on and so forth. Now, John Venus, I have made videos about in the past, and you can go and watch the videos I've made criticizing John Venus. Leo Venus, his brother, is really just not that interesting to me, I've got to say. But if you want to know what I think about that, maybe you'll find that entertaining and interesting, and maybe you won't. But no, I'm not going to, even if it is a topic that really interests me. And, by the way, something that's related to this, I'm very interested in the critique of antidepressants. And I recently had an offer to interview, I'd assume by Skype or something similar, to do an interview with Peter Breggin, one of the most famous doctors who are. There are other interests I have, and someone could raise it here and said, someone could say, well, to what extent do you think the incel phenomenon is linked to or related to the fact that like 20% of people are on mind-altering, mood-altering drugs of this kind? Great question. But I'm not going to derail this video and get into critique of antidepressants, even though that does interest me. I mean, I might mention it like this briefly, like, that's also an interesting point. I'm also very interested in the critique of marijuana, which I think will get mentioned in this video. I'm not going to derail the conversation, even if someone donates $20 in the chat. So, okay, let's just stop and get into the critique of the politics of legalization of marijuana or something. These are totally good questions. So, I ask you to sympathize. And if you were in my position, if you just imagine that you're in my position and you're, the audience is welcome to participate in the conversation, but I am leading the conversation and you got to follow my lead if you want to participate. Given that we've paused to address methodology, if you guys have a second, hit the thumbs up. It helps more people discover the video while it's broadcasting. It helps more people join the conversation while it's going on. And then after the video is wrapped, it'll help more people discover it when it's gathering dust on the internet for 100 years thereafter. But we now have 37 people in the audience. It would be great if we had 37 thumbs up. And as I say, it does actively promote the video to a greater extent. Oh. Okay. When you think about the meaning of the term self-pity, what it means to be self-pitying, I think there are two very different ideas that are misrepresented as one and the same in our language and cultural tradition. Because one element of being self-pitying, what we mean by this, is sitting down and really confronting and really reflecting on the extent to which you are sad, and then engaging in an analysis of why you're sad and what you're going to do about it. And I'm just being real with you when I say, I don't think anyone else can do that for you. Not even your mom, not your best friend, not your therapist. Like, I don't think there's anyone who can really help you with that. I do think probably many people in the audience have had this. I think someone can just say to you in like one sentence, like, dude, you're really sad. I can see you're really messed up. Like, messed up by this, or you're messed. Like, someone can say to you in one sentence, man, I can see you're really unhappy about your job. Someone can say to you in one sentence, man, I can see you're really unhappy about your marriage. They can say that, and that can lead you to reflect. It can instigate this, because you may be kidding yourself. You may think you're happy with your job. You think you're happy with your career. You think you're happy with your marriage. And that could even be the breaking point where you then sit down and engage in self-pity and reflection. But I don't think anyone else can feel sorry for you in that way. But for many of us, there's a shocking moment of discovery, maybe because you've made a whole series of compromises with your job. Like, oh, okay, I guess I can tolerate this. Oh, okay, I guess it gets worse and worse. And you're telling yourself it's okay. Very common in commitment relationships. You have a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a husband or wife, and they are treating you worse and worse, or something about how you relate to each other, and the relationship is getting worse and worse. But you compromise and you tell yourself you're okay with it. You tell yourself everything's fine, and actually you're miserable and you're cracking up, and you at some point have to stop and reflect on it. Now, I think this also points to the importance of self-pity, because if in this sense, if you were more self-pitying, in this positive, constructive, analytical sense, if you had been reflecting on what was wrong with your job, what's wrong with your relationship, at all those stages leading up to it, right, you wouldn't kind of reach that breaking point. And probably you would have made different decisions along the way. Now, obviously, I don't think I have to go into this at depth. Everything I've just said is very true about the struggles of incels. Now, and it can lead to really hard admissions to oneself. There are things you have to admit to yourself. It can be hard to admit, hard to reflect on. So I described at length this YouTube channel from a guy who's 6'4", and he thinks the reason why women won't talk to him, why women won't date him, why women won't fall in love with him, or won't sit with him, he thinks the reason is because his face is ugly. And he's wrong. I mean, if you just watch the video, dude, you don't have an ugly face. But just listening to him talk, you're sitting there thinking, something's really wrong with this guy. Now, I don't know him. I mean, if I'd actually gone to school with him, or if I'd been in the classroom with him, I would have a better sense. But like this guy, I mean, if he is not mentally retarded, maybe he's a drug addict. Some people have these really strange behaviors, their ability to speak and make eye contact and just because of years of drug addiction. Can totally explain that. Maybe he's a video game addict. A lot of these guys, they've made themselves retarded through years of smoking marijuana and playing video games. I'm using marijuana intentionally. Of course, you can also destroy your life with methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine. You can use harder drugs and have worse. Of course. Most people don't want to admit the extent to which it's marijuana. I remember an interview with a I think he was a rapper who had formerly been a drug dealer. And I remember he said that when he got involved in drug dealing, he thought he was going to be with these dangerous, exciting, self-disciplined men of action. Like he had this idea of who his colleagues would be in organized crime. And the reality was he found himself sitting on a couch with a bunch of lazy guys who were playing NBA Jam for 8 hours a day. Like the reality was these guys would sit in a house on a couch playing NBA Jam, playing this video game again and again. And then every so often someone knocks on the door and shows up and they hand over a plastic bag or whatever, That was the reality, that being a drug dealer wasn't exciting. It wasn't what gangster movies had led them to believe. But my point is, if you spend 5 years playing video games and smoking marijuana, whether it's 8 hours a day or 4 hours a day, it's with your spare time. It changes who you are. It has these effects, even if you were not born mentally disabled to begin with. These have, cumulative effects. And guys, again, so my point is not here to humble brag, and it's not to outright brag either. I think you all know, like, if I gain 20 pounds of body fat, there will still be women who are into me. And there still will be 10 years from now, too, just because I'm intelligent. Like, reciprocally, nobody wants to deal with what a huge advantage it is to just be intelligent and well-spoken. And let's keep it all real. English is the only language I can do this in, right? I can criticize myself. It can be a subject for another video. I could have become fluent in any one of the other languages I studied. It's a long list of languages, but I'm not. English is the only, but at least I can speak my first language well. And a lot of these people, they can't. And I'm just being real with you. When you see their YouTube channel or whatever, I don't know why. Like, I can't look at this guy's YouTube channel and diagnose him and say, oh, the reason why you can't speak in complete sentences is this. But the basic reality is English is your first language, and you can't speak in complete sentences. You can't communicate well in your own first language, right? So what woman would be interested in that? Switch the genders around. It's the same with women and men. If you meet a woman, you're like, "Whoa, something's really wrong with this woman," And again, I think you guys can tell. I'm not dismissing the fact that some people do have an ugly face. I'm not dismissing the fact that some people do have an unattractive body. But I'm saying that this whole discourse is a massive cope for the extent to which people don't want to look in the mirror and recognize that they're stupid, recognize that they're ignorant, and recognize that their stupidity and ignorance is in large part a result of their laziness. Well, you spent your whole fucking life watching anime movies and playing video games and not developing yourself intellectually. Newsflash, fucko. Nobody wants to eat lunch with you. Like, before you can fall in love, before you can have sex, before you can build up a more meaningful relationship, like, there's a really low threshold. Are you an interesting enough person that people want to go out for lunch with you? Okay, and again, it doesn't matter. If I'm 10 years older and 20 pounds fatter than I am right now, all kinds of women want to go out to lunch with me, including women who met me like for the first time that day. And that's been my experience my whole life. When I was 18, for one thing, when I was 18, women thought I was 28. Everyone thought I was way older than I was when I was 10. Nobody thought I was 18. But anyway, I was already old looking at 18. But, whether I was 28 or whether I'm 58, women are going to meet me and want to go out for lunch with me just because I'm an intellectually cultivated, interesting person. And plenty of those women, like, it's subjective, plenty of them don't think I'm attractive. Some women think I'm attractive, whether it's 2% of women or what. I have no delusions. I'm on no ego trip that way. But, like, I think we at least recognize that this is a problem with the way young women are raised in America. And we don't recognize that it's a problem with young men. I heard an interview. I know I've mentioned this on the YouTube channel before, but it was like 6 years ago. I heard an interview with a woman who grew up in the Czech Republic under communism. So again, Czechoslovakia has changed, really, but she grew up as a Czech under communism. And then she, at one point, somehow she escaped to the United States of America, and she worked as a model and then got work as an actress, And she said, the difference is for her growing up, everyone acknowledged she was a beautiful woman. Nobody ever told her that it was adequate for her to be a beautiful woman. No one ever told her this is all you need to get by in life. Like, this is enough. Everyone told her, look, you're a beautiful woman. You better sit down and hit the books and get a degree in chemistry or something. I forget what she studied. She said something boring. Like, look, you got to work hard. You got to develop yourself intellectually, academically. You've got to be prepared to kind of shoulder your burden in society and have a good job, whatever. And she said the minute she got to America, now admittedly, when she was in America, she was involved with modeling and acting. She was involved in a certain subculture within America. But she said as soon as she got to America, she was in a culture where apparently every beautiful young woman was told, this is it. You just need to focus on, your hair, your makeup, getting a bra that fits you right, learning to walk in high heels. A lot of women, when they're growing up, that's what they're told. Oh, you're beautiful. You got to practice how to walk in a sexy way so you don't fall over in high heels. I mean, nobody's born knowing how to walk in high heels. That's an art form these women have to cultivate. So nobody's born knowing how to do lipstick. I mean, these things are learned, where they're told, from a very early age, again and again, that your intellectual cultivation doesn't matter. And I've met so many people, including ugly people, including people who were born and raised ugly, and it's never occurred to them that this could be or should be a priority in their lives. Now, that side of our culture has, in the parlance of our time, gotten so toxic. It's become so rebarbative. It's become such a source of shame and ridicule, the bimboification of every good-looking young woman. You know what I mean? That they're encouraged to become bimbos. It's gotten so extreme that I do think now there's a little bit of a sense of the pendulum swinging to the other side, where people are starting to mentate the possibility that really it's important to encourage young women, beautiful or ugly, but it's an extra problem with women who are beautiful. That really they need encouragement to be dedicated, self-disciplined, develop themselves intellectually. Well, I've got to tell you something, let's get into some specific subcultures. Did you grow up around Hispanic people? I did. I remember, I can remember particular guys I went through school with. I knew Hispanic guys, and all their family ever encouraged them to do was play football. You know what I mean? Now, so to be fair, this is not the only subculture that's like this. I knew an Irish guy, and the only choice in his family, the only option he was given was whether he was going to play soccer, which they call football in Europe, whether he was going to play soccer or whether he was going to play rugby. That was a big deal. And he was completely expected to devote his life to either soccer or rugby. Now there are a few other sports in Ireland. He could have been hurling or something. But there are definitely white Australians where, as young men, this is it. The point of school is to participate in sports teams. And you weren't good enough to make the football team. Maybe you can do wrestling. Maybe you can do that's all the parents are interested in. That's all they cultivate. I'm just gonna be honest. The few black friends I knew, or the few black friends I had in Toronto, they were black people who were in a state of rebellion against that. You know what I mean? They were in no way victims of that cultural expectation. But obviously, the high school I graduated from, we had black students. Being on the basketball team, that was it. There was nothing else. There was playing basketball, there was watching basketball on TV, and there was playing video games related to basketball. And that was it. And nobody questioned it, and there was no pressure on them. And it was openly regarded that what they did in their school courses was a kind of joke, was a kind of distraction from that. None of them thought it was important for them to learn to speak French. Just give you an example. They would laugh. They'd laugh in your face. Say, oh, you think I'm going to speak French? You think I'm ever going to use this the minute I finish high school? No, obviously no concept of learning algebra. It's very hard to convince a young person that learning math is important. None. Now, again, it's not all black people in Toronto. I knew black people who were part of the kind of living in a state of revolt against that, where they were like, no, they really wanted to be an intellectual, they wanted to develop themselves. I personally have not known Hispanic people of that character, but obviously they exist. They're out there, Hispanic people who reject that. But, my point is, this is so ubiquitous that it's largely invisible to us. And I think this guy, this particular YouTuber who's 6'4", Again, I don't know to what extent he might be born mentally disabled, but even so, mentally disabled people can do their most to develop themselves intellectually. Like if you're autistic, do you think being lazy and playing video games and watching anime movies is going to help? Like if autism is your problem and you're just maybe you can't develop yourself intellectually as much as some other person. Maybe both the amount you can develop and the way in which you can develop, both qualitatively and quantitatively, it's different or it's limited, but still you can do the utmost for you. Like you can be the best you can be intellectually. And that's going to make a positive difference in every part of your life. And it's going to lead to relationships with other people, men, women, or whatever. It's going to lead to relationships with other people that are actually based on intellectual admiration for you, respect for you, rather than just carnal lust for your body. I mean, either you got that or you don't, but as I say, like I'm aware some women who approach me in life, some women who try to initiate relationships with me, sometimes it is carnal lust. Sometimes I am their type and it clicked and that's it. And you can tell that's what's going on. But there are also women throughout my life who've approached me. Again, normally it's they want to go out for lunch with you. Normally doesn't start with proposals of marriage, but where they're interested in you, they find you interesting. And my assessment, my belief is they don't think I'm attractive. They're not that carnally interested in me, but they're interested in me in other ways. So I don't have to digress on this at any length, but okay. So someone is saying fix the audio, but what was it bad for 5 seconds or what? Not much I can do at this end. All right, I'm gonna click this. Looks like it's using the right microphone. I'm gonna make a click here. You should have heard about 4 clicks there on the mic, and if you didn't, it's using the wrong microphone. But anyway, look, guys. All right, that's fine. Sorry, I mean it's probably just the internet that went out for a second. Probably someone in this building started playing video games. Oh well, it's too bad. Look, guys, sorry, but I mean there's only so much to do. So you said crackling for minutes. But a couple minutes is not that bad. I mean, sorry, life isn't perfect, but it's not like the whole. It looks like most of the time you guys were following the conversation. Great comment from Chickpeas. Anime was a mistake. Interesting criticism from Michael Harvey in the audience. Michael Harvey says Eisel and the general vegan crowd really hate Jordan Peterson, but he does a much better job at warning young men about becoming an incel and practicing stoicism / cleaning your room. I don't think Jordan Peterson gives you a working model for how to live a more meaningful life. I'm just being real. And Jordan Peterson does not present you with a model for well, look, guys, sorry. So I apologize. I had no control over the sound. Nothing changed at this end. So someone said it was bad for about 8 minutes. But I mean, you want me to start the live stream again? Like I can, and I hope I can. I can just, I can cancel and start again. But I apologize. But it's so someone else says it's good. Nothing was bad. Good. Maybe when people are listening to it afterwards, they're gonna increase the volume. But I would just assume. I mean, look, I apologize. I will make a note of it. I mean, basically, the connection between my computer and the mic I can change, but I'm using exactly the same connection that's worked more than 100 times, like more than 100 broadcasts. This particular USB setup, I'm using exactly the same setup. But I do worry about that stuff, and but normal when it happens, you're completely powerless. So yeah, but no, I do take that stuff seriously, and I've bought. How many microphones do I have in this apartment right now? 4 or 6, 4 at least. Yeah. But I just say we have a whole collection of microphones. I have spent a lot of time and money trying to get this stuff to work. But I mean, ultimately, it's a miracle that this is technologically possible at all. I always said that when I was in China. Like, look, it's amazing. I can do this at all. But there's only so much you can do. So, guys, it's great to have 40 people going live. I know a lot of YouTube channels that have a much larger audience that don't get as many people when they're live streaming. I've seen some lately, both vegan and non-vegan. So I do appreciate your being here. If you have a second, if you could hit the thumbs up button, I'd appreciate that, partly just because it helps more people discover the broadcast while it's happening, and it'll help more people discover it later. My lighting has gotten worse, but that's okay. Okay, so I'm happy to respond to any of this stuff, and I do think it's related. Other people are commenting on the stupidity of Jordan Peterson. Okay, but let's narrow this down so that it's more relevant to this conversation. If you don't know, I've made videos that reach more than 10,000 people each criticizing Jordan Peterson, and it's very meaningful to me. I mean, if I die tomorrow, the critique of Jordan Peterson is actually a significant thing I accomplished in my life, and that I managed to reach that audience, I managed to reach his audience. What I say, it's something I put some energy and effort into. But the claim I've been advancing in the first 55 minutes of this video is that the obsession with your facial appearance and your bodily appearance is a cope. In their terms, in the slang terms used by the incels themselves, I'm saying that's a cope, right? And instead, what people are coping with, what they're distracting themselves from, what they're rationalizing, what they're making excuses for, is their stupidity, their ignorance, their immaturity. And again, I want to say, even the discourse about social skills, that's also a cope, right? So whether or not women find me interesting, and then after finding me interesting, whether or not they find me attractive or they can think about themselves being in a relationship with me, right? That doesn't rely on self-confidence. That doesn't rely on social skills. Now, sorry, I'll use an example I used in the past. Let's say you're really not a very self-confident person and you're not a very well-spoken person, but you go into the theater and you start organizing and putting on a performance of Shakespeare's Hamlet. You do all the organization, you're the director and the producer, you're not an actor, let's say. Let's say you're kind of an awkward person. You don't have great social skills. All right. And you involve people in this project. In the past, well, whatever. I can give more details as to why this would be an interesting or politically significant, performance of Shakespeare. Well, there are going to be some women involved in that, whether they're in the audience or actors or the person who does the lighting or does the makeup. There are going to be some people there, and they think, this guy is kind of interesting. This is someone I'd like to have lunch with. I'm not guaranteeing you're going to have an amazing sex life or you're going to fall in love and get married and raise kids, but you are doing something interesting. You are being an interesting person. And even if you're kind of awkward in your way of speaking, you don't have great social skills, you don't have great communication, you're sitting around and talking to people about why you decided to mount this performance of Shakespeare. What motivates you, your interpretation of Shakespeare, what you care about and how you feel about this and so on. Now, there are limits. And by the way, I don't think Shakespeare is that meaningful. It can't be anime. It can't be cosplay. It can't be video games. No matter how erudite your opinion is about video games, about the differences between the Famicom disk system version of Excitebike and the NES version of Excitebike, I can sit here and give you very sophisticated opinions about video games, but some things don't matter. But my point in choosing Shakespeare is to say it doesn't have to be researching the cure for cancer. It doesn't have to be the future of democracy in Myanmar. But I've quite intentionally used the democracy in Myanmar as an example in my most recent video. So let's just mention that briefly. What if you did the research? What if you really got involved with a humanitarian effort and a political effort, to achieve democracy in Myanmar? What if you put years into that? What if you started learning one of those languages? Doesn't matter if it's Shan or, standard Burmese itself, whether it's one of the minority languages of Myanmar, whatever, that's interesting. And, I'm going to be real with you. This is my experience. I'm not that good looking. I'm really not. Okay. My experience is women who have never fucking heard of Myanmar before want to go to lunch with you. It's not just other women who are interested in researching the politics of Myanmar and the history of Myanmar. There will be women who are like, this is a country I've never heard of before. They know nothing about it. They meet you under whatever circumstance. They hear you talking in an intelligent way about the politics and history of Myanmar, and they're like, I'm interested. He's interesting. That's someone I want to go out to lunch with, whether or not you have sex with them or fall in love with them or whatever, right? You know, there's something really significant here. So this is branching off from Jordan Peterson. Okay, I think the commitment to care about the future of Myanmar is actually an act of rebellion. It's not conformist. You're not just fitting into the shoes your parents set out for you to fill or your grandparents set out for you to fill. Above and beyond, and with no relation to a kind of conservative conformist conception of society, right? You have come up with this idea. You have nothing to do with Myanmar. You're going to learn the language. You're going to study the history and politics. And in your small way, you're going to get involved. You're going to contribute what you can contribute to that discourse. It is actually a meaningful act of rebellion. I think this is the difference from anime, right? Like, what's wrong with just watching anime on TV? Like, really think about it. What's wrong with just playing video games? Well, I do think it's partly because, well, it's childish, it's conformist. You're embracing a form of entertainment that's just been set out for you. Now, look, I mean, putting on William Shakespeare, I mean, again, I've talked about this in earlier videos. Let's say, I feel it's a great example. Let's say you are a Black teenager living in Chicago, and you don't want to be part of the basketball scene, and you don't want to be part of the drug dealing and gang scene, and you don't want to be part of the hip hop scene. And you, as a Black teenager in Chicago, decide what you want to do is put on a performance of William Shakespeare, any of the plays, could be Hamlet, whatever, with an all-Black cast. And implicitly, this is a way of reaching out to other young Black people in your community and saying, hey, look, I want to lead a more meaningful life. Who's with me? Now, also, there may be other subversive things there politically. Like maybe politically, you make this into a commentary on Donald Trump or something. You know, like there are ways in which the performance of Shakespeare can be politicized. Okay, so it's an all-Black performance of Hamlet. I'll just point out, this isn't just Black. You could be Japanese, and you're in Japan. You're born and raised in Japan. You do an all-Japanese performance of Hamlet, and it's a commentary. You do it as a political commentary on things in Japan. It's very easy to politicize this and for this to have social significance. All right, I'm pointing out that there is a subtle sense in which this is rebellious, in which it's challenging the status quo and trying to transform the society we're a part of. And it's railing against the indifference of our society. It's railing against the phlegmatism of our society. It's challenging the complacency of our society. And that's what's different from anime, and that's what's different from playing video games. You know, I think this is utterly lacking from Jordan Peterson's model of a meaningful life. You know, now look. So I've read Jordan Peterson's book. We own his second book, or his second successful book, which we've looked at a few pages of, and it's unbelievably stupid and terrible. But you know, I'm familiar with Jordan Peterson's work. I've criticized Jordan Peterson. I can't sit here and tell you that all of his advice is bad. I would compare him to a fitness instructor who just tells you to try really hard. You know, that advice alone, if I do that, I can start a website. I can start taking my shirt off, and I can start filming myself doing 200 push-ups and saying, you can do 200 push-ups a day too, which is true. I think everyone in this audience can do 200 push-ups. Who here has done 200 push-ups this month? But you could, men and women. That's an attainable goal. I can start the 200 push-ups a day website and 200 push-ups a day challenge and film myself talk. And even if all I have to say is, hey, try really hard, or hey, you could try harder, you know, a huge percentage of people will benefit from that advice, even if it's totally banal. You know what I mean? So like on that level, of course, I can't say everything that Jordan Peterson says is wrong. Yeah, and people here are, wicked energy. Yeah, I agree. You know, however, we are setting, this is damning him with faint praise. Like, we are setting the standards incredibly low. And I think it's very meaningful to point out that the advice he's giving, it simply doesn't work for incels. I mean, there is nothing there for young men to respond to and build on. There isn't the model of a meaningful life. And there certainly isn't a model of how to make progress as an intellectual. And look, again, all right, not everyone can make progress as an intellectual, right? Some people are so severely mentally retarded that this isn't open to them. But when we're talking about people who are moderately mentally disabled, right? There is a question of doing the most you can do. And the extent to which you can improve your brain, even if you're somewhat mentally disabled, right, is so much greater than the extent to which you can improve your face or you can improve your body. That's really limited, right? Now, I'm here tempted to get into talking about Kristen Leo, to branch off. I guess I'll come back to Kristen Leo in a minute. So I'm going to treat this person as anonymous. A fan of the channel wrote into me, and he is mentally disabled. And he described his situation, and I will just say he is significantly mentally disabled. He's not just slightly mentally disabled. And he has some kind of social worker assigned to him, some kind of caseworker, and he talked about his situation. And he said completely matter-of-factly that he was just not going to attempt to finish high school. He was just going to get on with his life. And I sent him back a passionate and clearly worded email saying, no, this is the wrong decision. You're wrong. And I said, look, if you go back to high school 2 years from now and you finish high school, and if you go back to high school 5 years from now, that will still be really meaningful for you in your life. And I didn't tell him his business. I said, look, maybe you're right that this year you can't go back to high school, and maybe not next year, for all kinds of different reasons. But every year you are going to get more mature, you're going to get more self-disciplined, you're going to get more focused. And maybe just 2 years from now, you can go back to high school and you can complete it. And that's going to be so significant in your life. As opposed to, what he was talking himself into was just that he would accept basically living as a janitor for the rest of his life, that he was going to get a really low level of employment that he could get without going to high school. Again, because he's aware of his mental disability. Now, look, this guy, I don't know what his limits are, but my point is, this is me encouraging him. I said more than that. I've said more about the way in which the challenges of high school would actually be meaningful and important for him. Like, you are going to learn things you don't think you're going to learn by going through this process in high school, right? Okay, so this guy, obviously it's just based on his own description of himself. I completely accept that he is really mentally disabled. This is a significant mental disability. I'm not trivializing it. I'm not dismissing it. I'm not being like some gym coach who says everybody can do 200 push-ups or everyone can bench press 400 pounds. You can't. Some people aren't going to make it. But the point is, he can make progress from where he is today to being a better person in the future. And he may, intellectually, he may never be able to do the things I do. And some of the things that are effortless for me may be a lot of effort for him. But I'm still encouraging him, right? I'm still encouraging him to do the utmost. And this guy I've alluded to, the 6'4" guy, and fucking all these good-looking people who are on YouTube. I'm sorry, any good-looking, successful YouTuber, male or female, you look back at the last 5 years of their life and you look ahead at the next 5 years of their life. If they just make the effort to cultivate themselves intellectually, if they just make the effort, we're all born stupid. We're all born ignorant. But this is something you can change. And it's something you can change that's going to have profoundly positive consequences for your whole life, for every aspect of your life, not just getting laid, not just your sex life, not just who you marry if you want to get married or settle down. Not everyone does. But yeah, including that. Your intellectual development is gonna pull that along with you. Now, look, I already mentioned the particular incel I was talking about there, who's 6'4". He doesn't have an ugly face. He has a normal face. He's a normal, his face is normal looking for a guy. His eyes, there's nothing wrong with it. Kristen Leo is one of my adversaries here on YouTube. Kristen Leo is a YouTuber I don't particularly like. I don't like her politically. I don't like her intellectually. I don't like her ethically. She claims to be a vegan. She buys and sells leather on her own website. Sorry, just to give an example of what I mean when I say ethically. There's a lot wrong with Kristen Leo. Her latest video consists of her admitting that she has gotten into plastic surgery. Now, I say admitting because I have no reason to think that this is her first experience with this, but she's already now doing Botox. So she is about 30 years old. Yeah, right. She made some videos, I think, when she celebrated. She went from 29 to 30, talking about the cusp of the decade and her birthday celebration. So, okay. Now, look, I'm going to be real with you. For me, personally, subjectively, Kristen Leo is ugly. Like, to me, she's not even plain. I perceive her subjectively as an ugly person. Her experience in life is of everyone treating her as a beautiful person. She has been involved in modeling. She has been an airline hostess. People used to say airline stewardess. She still to this day models on Instagram and models these clothes and boots and shoes that she sells and resells. She has this business, but she takes a picture of herself in the clothes. And there's no doubt a very large part of her YouTube viewing audience is a result of her, presenting herself sometimes in a bathing suit or in revealing attire in these videos, that her physical appearance is part of that. So she is someone in her own society, in her own career. She has been treated as a beautiful person. She's regarded as a beautiful person. You get to age 29, you get to age 30, and she is an incel. I mean, she doesn't identify with the incel philosophy, but she has made a whole series of videos bitterly recriminating on the fact that, like, there are no men, really meaning there's no men for her, that men don't want her, and the men she could have, she's not interested in. I've been to Athens, right? A lot of guys in Athens watch football. A lot of guys in Athens drink beer. Like, I get it, but obviously 99% of them are not vegan. What percentage of people in Athens are vegan? If you want just those three requirements, if you want a man who is vegan, doesn't drink alcohol, doesn't watch football on TV, like, we're not even setting a super high intellectual standard. I'm not going to ridicule her. Like, I get it. It's hard out here for a pimp. That's a song. I don't even know if it was the 90s or early 2000s. You remember that song?
Of course.
Who? What was the name of the group? They won an Oscar for it or some shit. It was on the soundtrack. No. As I recall, they won an Academy Award for its place on a soundtrack, and it was one of the first rap albums to win an Academy Award. Here's a
song by DJ.
Wow. So that was the original, I guess. I thought it was 3 6 Mafia. Who did it? Anyway, no big deal. Anyway, it's hard out here. I get it. So
there are results for that.
Yeah. So there's more than one. That's it. There was more than one version of the song. That's what that is. Yeah. No, that's what it is. Some of those rap songs are like that. Anyway, 3 6 Mafia put out a song called "It's Hard Out Here for a Pimp," which I was listening to. That's the most important. If there's one thing you learn from this video, if there's one thing you take away from this video, it's obviously the most important thing. This is why I like doing live streams, honestly. I like this kind of stuff that comes up. It wouldn't be here if it were this kind of focused, edited video. So you look at this woman, Kristen Leo, and I've admitted, for me, subjectively, she's ugly, okay? And you think, okay, you reach age 29, you're looking ahead to 30, now you're 30, what are you going to do? Where is it going to go from here? And it does not occur to her to develop herself intellectually. It does not occur to her that the type of men she wants, because she doesn't want just any man, she doesn't want just any man she can get, that those men will have intellectual standards and intellectual expectations that exclude her, or she's not living up to it that way. All of her time and energy are going into her body, the clothes she wears, like her appearance in that sense, how the outfit is put together, her hair. She puts a lot of time and energy into her hair, her makeup, and now, as she gets older, increasingly plastic surgery, including Botox injections. So she just had some procedure done to her lips, which makes her look like a woman who's had plastic surgery. Like from my perspective, that doesn't make you more attractive, it makes you less attractive just because it tells me something about you, about how vain you are, and so on. Kristen Leo is in some ways an ordinary example, and she's in some ways an extraordinary example because this is someone who has earned her living for many years coming on YouTube and talking about politics. Now, so I've said already, to me, subjectively, Kristen is ugly. In some other universe where I was single, where Melissa and I had never met, like where I was totally single, let's crank it up. Let's say I've been single for years in some other, like I've been single for a long time. If someone asked me, because by the way, Kristen and I, we're way less than 6 degrees of separation apart. I've known people who've known Kristen. There are not that many vegans on YouTube. What if a friend of mine said to me, hey, look, Kristen is down bad. She's been single for years and she's complaining about it. You're single. What do you think about meeting up with Kristen? My answer would have nothing to do with her hair, nothing to do with her clothes, nothing to do with her face. You know what I mean? Nothing. The reality is that probably if Kristen Leo had tried to develop herself intellectually, just in the past 5 years, we don't have to go back 20 years, just in the past 5 years, if she had given it 110%, she probably would be somebody I'd be interested in. And what is it? It just means you want to have lunch with them. You think, wow, this is an interesting person. This is a brilliant person. This is an intelligent person. You want to have lunch with them. And if that person lacks self-confidence, and if that person lacks social skills, a woman who is attracted to a man, who is interested in a man, who finds a man interesting, she will be emboldened by his lack of self-confidence. That's like a good thing for her. A woman who actually wants a man, right? Even if she just wants him at step one, she wants to take him with lunch. She will take advantage of his lack of self-confidence. She will take advantage of his awkwardness, and so she will put herself in a command position, and she'll make it happen. She'll initiate the relationship. And I don't even think I need to narrate that if you switch the genders, that's true. If a man wants a woman, again, like let's just say he wants to take her out to lunch, he's interested in her, and she has bad social skills, right? She lacks self-confidence, right? We all know what it means immediately to say that a man takes advantage of a woman's lack of self-confidence, her low self-esteem, right? Like for the person doing the pursuing, your lack of self-esteem, it's almost an invitation. It's not an obstacle to be overcome, So just say these are all copes. Like in there, that they just say cope, meaning it's a coping mechanism. Like, oh, you're going to blame the fact that you have bad social skills. You're going to blame this. You're going to blame that. And it's not any of that at all. It really is the lack of intellectual development. So sorry, coming back to it, I have like 4 things written down on a piece of paper here. Really, the big idea I wanted to get across in this video had to do with self-pity, with feeling sorry for yourself. So guys, I'll take a moment now to read your comments. If you want to say something, like now's a good time for you to write something I'll actually read and respond to. But look, I don't begrudge Kristen Leo her feeling sorry for herself. If anything, that's like the most positive part of what's going on, right? Like, I think it's totally fine for Kristen Leo to reach a breaking point where she sits down and feels really sad. She feels really down bad. She sits there and she has pity for herself. She feels sorry for herself. And she reflects on the fact that there is no one for her in the society. There is no man for her. She's never going to have the love of her life as she'd imagined it 10 years ago or 5 years ago, whatever it was. Like, I think that's really meaningful. And I think it's really meaningful to engage in an analysis of why that is. And my point here is the correct conclusion is not that her lips are too thin and she should get fillers or Botox or injections or plastic surgery to make her lips thinner. Pardon me, to make her lips thicker. I think that's insane. I don't think that's the correct conclusion at all. But the actual self-pity is not the problem. Like, self-pity leads to self-analysis. It leads to analysis of the society you're in, the job you have, the university you're at, whatever it is. Like, it can lead to political analysis on a larger scale, analysis that goes way beyond yourself and your problems. And it can lead to really important conclusions about what's got to happen next, And the answer is not Botox injections. I mean, Chris D'Elia is a really good example. Probably most of you in the audience are horrified that I've said to you that to me she's ugly. Well, whatever. I have my own subjective taste. I'm completely owning that it's subjective, right? But if you think she's beautiful, or you think she's plain, you think she's good looking enough, then what I've just said, it's even more true, because it's even more ridiculous. Why are you engaging in quote unquote looks maxing, as the incels say? And look, I'm sorry, the whole thing with fucking clothes and hair. There is no heterosexual man in the world who says, you know what made me fall in love with this woman? You know what made me first notice her? What made me really interested in my girlfriend or my wife? It was that she wore these really hot shoes and they matched so well with the dress and the nylon socks. Never. There is no heterosexual man who looks at a woman and thinks, wow, she knows how to pick earrings that match with the highlights and accents in her haircut. I want to have lunch with her. Zero. Like, not the shallow guys and not the zero. Now, there are some gay men who work in the fashion industry and they respond that way. Like, they're not interested in you. They're like, oh, wow, that's a woman who knows how to pick high heels and knows how to pick earrings that all match the colors and where like, that exists. There are zero heterosexual men who care about your fucking earrings. There are zero heterosexual men who care about your designer shoes. And on the contrary, there are a lot of heterosexual men who see that as a red flag, because it's like, whoa, this is a woman who cares about wearing expensive designer shoes. Maybe she's going to expect me to buy her designer shoes. Like, maybe there are a lot of things about what your life is going to be like together. If I move in with this woman, is she going to have a separate closet for her designer? Like, there are a lot of things there where heterosexual men are actually going to respond to it negatively. But, visibly or invisibly, every heterosexual man cares about how intelligent you are. Even the shallowest guys, even the guys who swear they don't, even the guys who will put their hand on a stack of Bibles and swear to you that all they care about is that a woman has a nice ass. I guarantee you, I've known those guys face to face, guys who say they just care about a woman's body. You get 5 minutes into the conversation and they start telling you about all the other things, because they know what it's like. Those guys, they know what it's like to start a relationship with a woman just because she has a great ass, just because they were attracted to her physically. And then as soon as she moves into their apartment, as soon as they're living together in an apartment, their whole life is horrible and terrible because of, the intellectual aspects of what really makes a relationship work, what really matters. They have to deal with that. I'm sorry, I could tell a ton of stories about this, but I knew a guy, and he was in a relationship with a woman. She had been an aspiring Olympic athlete. So I don't know. I think she didn't get to the Olympics, but she had been training to be an Olympic athlete. So obviously she had a very impressive body. I never saw her. I never met her. I just heard this guy's story about her. And that's what he liked about her. That's what he wanted her for. He was very impressed with her body. And she had physically beaten him up numerous times. She had really seriously assaulted him. And he described one time when she was trying to knock him unconscious, when he, it was really that extreme what he'd been through with her. And I could tell a lot of details of that. But that was a woman who became, physically abusive, and she was proud of herself. She thought it was like, she wasn't ashamed to beat up her boyfriend, to beat up the man who loved her. She felt like this was a distinction, a mark of honor, that she, and she's in training for the Olympics, and she can beat up her boyfriend. Now, look, again, that particular woman, I don't have any reason to think she's like a psychologically dark character. I just think she's an idiot. I mean, I think it sounded like she was just a really childish person who had never developed themselves intellectually, at all. And, I remember he told me the story. So he told me the story about the most extreme physical abuse, where she was trying to knock him unconscious. Like, she punched him in the face like more than 30 times on this occasion. Like, it was really serious, a really protracted, beating. And he told me about the conversation he had with her afterwards too, where, he said to her, it's not profound. He said that if he had punched her back just once, he would be in jail now. And how serious the consequences would be. And he said, if he had responded with violence, she would be in the hospital and he would be in jail. So, how do you think you can do this? So, I mean, he got beaten up, but he didn't go to the hospital, and she didn't go to jail. But this was really serious. But I mean, what I said to him after he told this story, I said, "Yeah, but you didn't leave her." Right? I was like, "How long did they like after that day?" Like, I noticed in your story, you don't say, "And then I kicked her out," or "Then I left." You stayed with her. Why? And for how long? And he hung his head. He was like, "Yeah, you're right. You're right." He talked about them, but no, he stayed with her. He tried to make it work. Now, look, this is an extreme example, but my point is, sorry, and that guy, the other big relationship, the same guy, the other relationship he told me about that made his life horrible was with a woman who was a stripper. She was a professional stripper. And again, I'm not hating on him, but all of these women in his life, he told me about, he chose them just because of their physical attributes, just because their body was attractive. And apparently the stripper was a really good looking woman. And he told me about how she made his life horrible too. My point is, like, the shallowest guys who swear that's what they live by, intellectual qualities matter to them also. Ethical qualities matter to them also. And obviously, I don't know what that guy went on to do with the rest of his life, but I'm guessing the next relationship he got into wasn't with a stripper and wasn't with an Olympic athlete. He was probably started looking for women who had some of the qualities that would at least let him feel safe to fall asleep in his own bed in his own apartment, kind of thing. You know what I mean? Sorry, but obviously, I mean, a really simple one is sobriety. But yeah, frankly, I think it's almost a fantasy to think that you can have a life that's just based on physical attraction, physical appearance. It's people want to believe that. All right, guys, I'm going to catch up with your comments now for a moment. By the way, sorry, Melissa, if you want to join, I mean, no, it's a sad topic of conversation, but it's hard for me to turn to Melissa and say, "Hey, is there anything you want to add?" And no, it's sad, but like fundamentally, what I'm saying here is very hopeful and positive, because I'm talking about the difference you can make. I'm talking about the way in which you can change and you can be a better person and you can live a better life. And I think it's totally incompatible with what Jordan Peterson has to say, and it's totally incompatible with what the incels have to say. But I mean, there's a sense in which this is actually a positive and uplifting sort of message, as depressing as it may be. Sure.
Yeah, I haven't made a YouTube video about this, but I've made Instagram posts talking about how much your philosophy has changed my outlook on just your ability to change your intellect and improve on what become a more knowledgeable person. That's something you really can change, whereas you can't exactly change your bone structure. You can't really do much to change like where fat deposits in your body, all these things, all these minor things that people obsess over. And I just thought it was funny that we happened to listen to that video from Chris and Leo yesterday, because I had in the morning walked around the city and seen these signs for lip filler, Botox, and all these different things that people pay money for in order to feel better about themselves. When I can really see, the truth in what you're saying here, that it's not necessarily about your appearance. It's really about your intellect. It's about what you have to say and how you say it. So yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything in disagreement to say.
Well, I mean, I guess it's also kind of interesting because, I began this conversation by talking about political violence and the whole political and social significance of the incel discourse wouldn't exist without massacres. This has been created through murder, murder as a public political act, that galvanizes it one way. And then the other, force here is just these guys claim, or their complaint, that they can't get laid at all, they can't have sex at all, or specifically that they can't have loving relationships, marriages. A lot of the discourse is about that. It's not just about sex. It's about love. It's about marriage and having children. That is part of the discourse. You have been living for the last 5 years in a situation where you have no problem getting laid. You know, you're in a loving relationship with someone who supports you, and that's not a question. I mean, you don't have to study to get laid within this relationship or whatever. You know, like, that's not your issue at all. But you know, you really are in a position to feel the transformation of how your whole life has gotten better and gotten more meaningful because of the work you've done intellectually. And I'd say too, like, I think you could contrast that to how meaningless it was. There was a time when we both worked on improving our ability to bake and cook, you know, to bake bread. That adds nothing to my life today. Like we can bake bread today, but like, you know, like my point being, there are other things you've worked on that are not totally meaningless. I mean, that baking bread more meaningful than watching anime. You have also developed physically. You've started, before she met me, she'd never lifted weights at the gym. She's learned how to lift weights. You know, there are other things, but like the fact that those other things exist in your life, like, I think that even gives more of a perspective to, like, gives you more of a sense of scale to the enormity of how much the intellectual development matters. You know, well, yeah, I disagree if you want to disagree, but yeah, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it was just a response to one of the comments that you received, but I am very interested in how the fact that so many people are taking medications for depression or for ADHD, how this could be playing a role in the incel movement, and in even the role that they played in the massacres that have been carried out by people within the incel movement. Because getting together with you, I also credit that as the beginning of my sobriety.
Yeah,
and
right.
For me, that has really the distance, the time that I've had to reflect on it has really made it very apparent to me just how much smoking marijuana every day for years of my life really held me back, and drinking alcohol really held me back too. Anytime that I had on the weekends to, cultivate myself intellectually, I was spending just a complete waste of time. Completely wasting my time playing video games, watching video games,
watching a lot of sitcoms and crap.
Sports.
You watch just crap on TV.
No, it was just I appreciate what you said earlier. I didn't watch anime, but I understand your point about anime. It's like, these are the things that are laid out for you. Whereas there's a sense of rebelliousness and putting on a
almost any kind of meaningful life, for example.
All black cast Hamlet. That's something that's really challenging the status quo. I agree with you. And I didn't have that creativity, but I did have the depression. I did have the sense of anxiety and feeling like, where is the future here? And wanting a sense of direction.
So I want to branch off here, but I think this can come back. Like, you can continue saying exactly what you're saying, which you'll see. So it's one of the few things I've written down this piece of paper I want to talk about is when you think about self-pity and the positive value of self-pity, the positive importance of feeling sorry for yourself, right? I would contrast that to the effects of marijuana. Like, from my perspective, and by the way, I said this when I was 15. I said this when I was 16. I said this when I was 17. This came up with my circle of friends in high school. I was talking about this then from the same perspective I'm talking about now. What I said back then is, what is so dangerous about marijuana is that it allows you to think you're happy when you're not. Like, the effects of marijuana, of course, compared to methamphetamine, they're subtle. Compared to, heroin, they're subtle. I understand. Like, you can conceal, like, the effects of marijuana. It's possible to keep your day job, and people aren't suspicious of you the way cocaine makes them suspicious of you, the change in your behavior and so on. But even then, I feel like I could add a whole bunch of footnotes, because it's often very obvious that someone smokes marijuana, and there are people who very successfully there are people who very successfully conceal hard drugs in their career. So actually, there are a lot of exceptions to this generalization. But nevertheless, what I said already when I was a teenager, and everyone I knew at high school was smoking marijuana, was, look, the problem isn't the direct effect of the drug itself. The problem is that you're not sitting down and reflecting on how unhappy you are. Like, in the terms we're talking about here, that it's concealing how sad you are, that it's misdirecting you away from self-pity. Like if you're unhappy at school, if you hate your teachers at school, you hate what you're studying, why? And you got to sit down and think about it. I sent another tough love email to one of my Patreon supporters recently, a guy who was still in high school. And so this guy isn't mentally disabled, or isn't to my knowledge. It's a totally different guy. Guy was still in high school. And he was saying to me dismissively how what his teachers are teaching him in high school is crap and what's in the books are crap. And I really pushed back on him. I said, okay, well, here's what I think is the problem. I think you're on an ego trip. I think, you feel like you're too good to do the work and do the studying. And actually, you need to do 110% of the work. Like they give you this history textbook. You think it's crap. You're probably right. It's probably a bad history textbook. Well, why don't you do the fucking research so you know what's wrong with it? You don't just read it once and you don't drag your feet into the minimum. You do 110%. You read it twice and you go out and get other history. Like I was talking him through, in effect, this is how to be an intellectual when you're still a high school kid. That's what it is. It's at a much lower level than being an intellectual in your 30s. But still, look, instead of sitting there petulantly and being like, I'm not going to do the work. I'm too cool to do the work. I'm too cool for my professors. I'm too smart to read this history textbook. No, you're not. Right? If you were actually too smart, you'd read the history textbook and you'd do the research and you'd have all the footnotes so you know exactly in what way this history textbook is dishonest, so that you understand exactly the lies your history teacher is telling you, and you can even prove it. You can even stand up for yourself. I don't recommend standing up in the classroom, but you can start a YouTube channel and you can get on YouTube and explain, hey, like let's say it's Texas. Here in the state of Texas, this is what the textbook says. This is what my teacher said, and here's the ways in which it's wrong. Now you're an intellectual. Now you're starting to develop as an intellectual, not feeling like you're too good for it, so on and so forth, right? All right. No, sorry, that digression. Even still, add marijuana to the equation, right? You got a sulky, sullen kid who feels they're too smart for their teacher, who feels they're too good to do the reading, too good to deal with the textbook, right? And now they're getting stoned 4 days a week. Now they're smoking marijuana. The word complacency isn't powerful enough to get at what I'm saying here. Like if you think of this as a fork in the road, like either you feel sorry for yourself, either you engage in self-pity where you feel sad, you recognize that you're sad, and you really reflect on it. Like you really, really analyze, why am I sad? Why am I unhappy with high school, with my career, with my girlfriend, with all the things that make you unhappy? Maybe it is. Maybe some of it's political. You live in a society where you hate the political establishment, whatever it is, where you really engage in self-pity productively. Or here's another fork in the road. You get stoned and play NBA Jam. You smoke marijuana and sit on the couch, whether it's video games or watching a TV show like South Park, whatever. And you sit there and laugh and smile in this inebriated state. This is the sense in which I think marijuana is so dangerous. And again, for me, I think it has everything to do with self-pity, with the recognition of how sad you are, and then engaging in a kind of productive analysis to move forward. Oh, right. And I didn't even mention, of course, the other reason why you may be sad is because you don't have a boyfriend or girlfriend, you don't have a husband and wife. I probably don't need to read it, but and people do cope with that in those ways too. So, babe, take away everyone. But if you have more to say specifically on the marijuana issue and that, marijuana in the mini.
Yeah, I definitely do, but I won't. I won't speak on.
No, I do think it's so.
But most people don't know everything about my life. You are one of the few people in this world who I've really shared, so many things about my life, and
she knows everything about my life also. Okay? It's not like I'm mysterious.
So, I recognize that, I'm talking to you here, but I'm also talking to the audience that doesn't really know all the ways in which I felt hopeless in college too. So I really relate to what you were talking about with nobody can feel the self-pity for you.
Yes, that's right.
I didn't even have that because maybe the roles are just different with females versus males. It's just like, there was a lot of coddling that went on. And when I talked about how helpless and hopeless I felt.
Oh, you're doing fine.
Yeah. When I talk about
you're right. For women, it's worse. Oh, you'll do great, sweetie. You're doing fine. I'm filling in the blank culturally. I know exactly what you're doing.
Just like, just study really hard and you'll pass your classes and okay, what about when I didn't pass my classes? That was such a blow to my confidence, such a blow to my self-esteem when I wasn't doing well in school, and it was partly because I was starting to rely on marijuana to cope with some really awful things that happened in my life, and it's like just marijuana. I agree with you. It allows you to be complacent, allows you to be happy momentarily. I mean, it's not, the effects don't
it's not permanent. That's why I have to do it every day.
Right.
Some people can do it multiple times a day.
Yes, exactly. It becomes a habit.
But you're not confronting the causes for your unhappiness.
Yeah, so yes, exactly what I'm talking about. But I just say, the negative effects that it had on my, I just can't believe now in the position that it's hard for, sometimes it's easy for me to lose sight of this, but the state that I'm in now, I feel bad about the times of the day that I'm just not alert, I'm not quick, I'm not alert. And there are times that, I just screw up on something, some paperwork or something. I don't know.
You're in a scattered state of mind.
Yeah, because for whatever reason, I'm just not with it at that moment. Like that to me, just those periods of the day where I feel tired or lethargic, like I want to do everything I can to avoid that. I cannot believe for years of my life, like I was inducing that in order to sedate myself and feel, try to feel better about this one. That was really not the right way to go about it. So yeah, I know this is only partly related to this incel phenomenon. But
I think it's I think it's a perfect parallel.
Okay.
Like in your case, it wasn't related to getting laid, but in every other aspect, it's the same thing. Like that's my feeling about it.
Yeah.
And not to insult you, but I think you could imagine if you had been fat and ugly, then it would have been exactly the same.
Oh,
Go on,
you commented on how some of the just focusing on your body, focusing on your appearance is a cope. To use this vocabulary. Yes, I really do think to distract from just lack of cultivation, someone's stupidity, someone's ignorance, someone's inability to even express themselves in their first language. That's a really good point. We spend so much time, as a society in our culture, we spend so much time watching television and consuming things. We don't really spend enough time cultivating our ability to speak well. I think this is a problem in the modern age. So this aspect of it, I really think that's crucial. And adding drugs to it, adding marijuana to it, you think that improved my speech? No, it put me in a state where I didn't have to speak, and I was just So I just say it's
you're constantly sedated. So look. There's a comment from the audience here, and I'm not here to ridicule you and make you feel bad about yourself, but I do just want to say, in reading this comment, I think you're a terrible person. I could reflect on why this comment makes me think you're a terrible person, but it's possible. You don't know how old any of these people are. It's possible you're just a very young person who has no real world experience. And it could be both. You could be both young and a terrible person. So here's the comment. It's from someone in the audience called Sullen Potato. Quote, being a lifelong student means nothing if you do nothing with it. I know a lot of unemployed or underemployed intellectuals who are not impacting their communities in any sort of meaningful way. Close quote. So again, it's just that there's this comment makes me think you're a terrible person. All right. In the Army, you can have 10 guys doing exactly the same job. Let's narrow it down. Let's say it's the French Foreign Legion. And I know, because I looked at joining the French Foreign Legion, I know what their daily routine is. So every day they're doing exactly the same exercises, jogging, jumping hurdles, shooting targets. They have a certain physical training routine. Sometimes it involves things like digging ditches, getting into foxholes, stuff, Okay. So, you have 10 guys, and every day they literally do exactly the same job. Exactly. Okay. But one of them is developing himself intellectually. One of them in his spare time is really reading about politics and history. And say they're learning a language, becoming fluent in a foreign language. You think that doesn't matter? You think, and let's say the other 9 guys, let's say each one of them is different. One of them, in his spare time, when he's not doing this job in the army, he's just watching sports on TV. One of them is just playing video games. Let's say one of them is an alcoholic. Maybe one of them is a drug addict. Maybe one of them is just into soap operas. Maybe one of them is a whoremonger. Like he just sleeps around. He goes to nightclubs and like that's his whole life is pursuing women and prostitutes that he can hook up with in nightclubs. You know, they have different interests. But out of these 10 guys, let's say there's just one who's an intellectual. What does that look like after 5 years? If you just show up at the army camp and see them for one day, you think, oh, well, they all shoot a rifle just as well. They all run the obstacle course just as well. That's what I mean when I say running hurdles. They have these military obstacles, but it is a lot like running hurdles. You know, they're jumping over hurdles and climbing walls. Oh yeah, all 10 men are the same. After just 5 years. Okay, life is long. Where are they at when they're 65? Where are they at after more than 40 years? Really? No, it's not just the military. I chose that because that's a job where everyone is doing exactly the same thing. You can have 10 people who work in real estate. You can have 10 people who, I mean, any conceivable job where you're basically doing the same thing, you know, and you're quote unquote underemployed, as you put it. The point being, really, this doesn't have to do with underemployment or overemployment, does it? You can be a surgeon. Most surgeons are not intellectuals. You can be a successful architect. You can have a high status job where nobody would call you underemployed. That's irrelevant. That's immaterial because your employment has nothing to do with your intellectual development. And I just want to say that's even true for me here on YouTube. I started a research project, this is now years ago, but not that many years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, where I decided I had to learn the history of the English Civil War. No, there's no pressure on me to do that for my audience. No way is part of my success on YouTube, you know, to deal with my own ignorance or for my own intellectual development. It's like, well, this is a chapter of history I have to put the work in on. I am still now, like literally like today, learning more about the American Revolution. And that research is linked to the history of the English Civil War, by the way, in a dynamic way. So one helped to set up the other. I don't need to finish my book. I don't need to for this YouTube channel. Any of you could say we could list off 10 different things I could do to get more views on YouTube. I can hire a model in a bikini. I can do a bunch of comedy videos that involve a woman in a bikini or something. All kinds of things I can do to be more successful as an entertainer, as a filmmaker, as a YouTuber, right? So, I mean, even for me, like my intellectual development isn't really related to my job. Even for an architect, it's not related to your job. But obviously, as a soldier in the military, what you're expected to live up to as an intellectual standard is very low. They need you to be sharp. They need you to be alert when you get up there with the machine gun. But, you know, no, that one guy in 10 who's developing himself intellectually, it really matters. And with the passage of just a couple of years, you see the difference it makes. And, you know, whether or not he may never be promoted in the military. The military doesn't need that many guys in intelligence. You know, they don't need, you know, he could just keep on firing the machine gun for the French Foreign Legion for his whole career. It totally happens. You know, whatever your job is, it 99%. You know what? I don't even want to say it's 90% of the time. I'm going to say 100% of the time, your intellectual development isn't really related to your job. Even if you're a painter like Picasso, your commitment to leading a meaningful life or being a lifelong student and developing yourself as an intellectual really has nothing to do with your success as a painter, you know? So no, it really matters. And it really has tremendous effects. Now, the other thing I'd say here, I mean, it makes me think you're a bad person. So partly, I think you're a bad person because of the way in which you've linked this to earning money, which it doesn't just have nothing to deal with it. It's kind of antithetical to what we're talking about here. But the other thing is this statement you've made, not impacting their communities in any sort of meaningful way. Who is beholden to their community? Nobody. Like, guys, you don't hear that side of my nihilism all that often. You think I owe the city of Toronto anything? You think I have a moral obligation to be involved in or care about the politics of the city of Toronto? I don't. Each one of us, we choose the burden we're going to take on in life. Now, I did go to City Hall in Toronto. I did get involved in municipal politics. I did. Long story. I can talk about that. And I learned from that experience. That was educational in a way university never can be. University education in political science is very different from actually doing the politics, literally being in the same room as the mayor and actually getting up at the microphone and giving a deposition and so on. There's a way in which I can learn that. But I made the decision that I was going to go to Cambodia and get involved in Cambodian politics, right? It's totally your choice, ex nihilo, right? You are not beholden to any community. You are not beholden to any nation. You are not beholden to any religion, right? The choice is yours. And this is part of the liberating, empowering message of nihilism, right? The fact that your parents are Muslim doesn't mean you have to be Muslim. You also don't have to be an anti-Muslim. Like, you don't have to become an atheist who is engaged in the critique of Islam or trying to convert people from Islam. You can be born Muslim and decide to go to Cambodia and be involved in Cambodian politics that have nothing to do with Islam, one way or the other. You can be born Muslim. Let's say you're born in Syria, and you can move to Toronto and you can get deeply involved in the politics of Toronto or Chicago or Los Angeles. Like, it's on you. But being an intellectual has nothing to do with earning money out of your intellectual development. It has nothing to do with the question of whether or not you get a promotion in the military because you're an intellectual. And normally they do note those guys. Like, oh yeah, here's the one guy in 1,000 who's reading books in his spare time. And they will note it down on the record and they'll mention it to the guys in the Intel Corps and intelligence or in the SIGINT Corps, signals intelligence, or they'll note it down for the language. We're like, oh yeah, we do have a guy who reads books. Yeah, maybe you'd be interested in him for some other kind of training or assignment. It does happen sometimes. But also, they don't need a whole lot of guys. They need a lot of guys who can fire a machine gun. They don't need that many guys working in intelligence. The point is, your intellectual development doesn't have to do with earning money. You're not beholden to earn money, and there's no reason to assume you can monetize that. And also, there is absolutely no sense in which you're beholden to your community or any community. And if you don't like the community you're born into, choose a new one or start your own, even. Like, literally, you can go to an abandoned ghost town and buy a house for $5,000. You can literally start your own community in the physical, tangible sense. I can move into a town in Utah with my 5 biggest fans. We can start a community. Life would be hard. No. So it can be a community that doesn't exist, or you can choose Myanmar. It's all on you in that sense. And again, so look, I won't go into this in any length or in depth. We started this talking about incels, right? Are you fucking kidding me that your intellectual development doesn't matter in this sense? If you have a bunch of guys who are currently in the U.S. Marine Corps who all go to a bar together. So this happens. I can give you a very, very specific example. There is a U.S. Marine Corps base that's a short drive outside of Los Angeles. Not worth getting into the details. And every so often, a whole bunch of those guys, so these are the young, strong, physically fit guys from the U.S. Marine Corps, they go into Los Angeles to try to get laid, to go to a nightclub or go to some other place like this where they can meet women because their life on the base is very limited. Okay. Now, we started this incel discourse. Let's just say you are a woman. They could go to the dance club at Disneyland. They may not be maybe a wholesome place like this, not some den of sin. Like, let's say they go to Disneyland together. You think it doesn't matter the difference between the soldier who is just a video game addict, who in his spare time on his bunk bed is playing a portable video game system, and the soldier who on his spare time on his bunk bed is really developing himself intellectually? That makes such a difference to women, even the women who've never really thought about it. Like, women who aren't aware they're looking for an intellectual man. They meet this guy and he's sharp and he's interesting and he's profound. And here's this other guy who does exactly the same job and earns the same amount of money. In this case, they're in the same physical condition. Let's say they're all doing the same training at the Marine Corps base. And this guy is dumb and out of it, and all he spends his time doing is playing video games and watching anime. Like, sorry, this isn't the only sense in which it's meaningful, but this video is addressed in large part to the incel phenomenon. Of course it matters. And how abominably shallow do you think people are? My claim is even the people who identify as shallow, even the people who go to Disneyland, we're saying this rather than there are dance, there are dance clubs and things within Disneyland. There are kind of middle-aged and more teenaged, attractions at Disneyland. I think people do hook up at Disneyland anyway. Even people who tell themselves they're only looking for someone with a great body, it even matters to them, and the vast majority of men and the vast majority of women, they don't. They wouldn't say they're just looking for someone with a great body. So no, it matters on that level. And then it matters even more in terms of all the other friendships and all the other connections you have in your life. And look, it matters in prison. And of course, it matters within the prison of the vegan movement. Who is friends with me? Who's trying to be friends with me? And who's trying to be friends with Kristen Leo? Who is trying to be friends with Tess Begg? If all you are is a body, that's all you've presented yourself as, that's all you've tried to develop, that's all you've got to offer, and that's how you relate to people. You think, again, of course, this has an impact on your love life, your romantic life, or whatever. But in every other part of your life, it's huge too. And then, what if you want to have some impact on some community, whether that's Toronto City Hall or the civil war in Myanmar? Well, what then? What can Tess Begg really do? What can Kristen Leo really do? What can you do? And now ask yourself, who are you going to be 5 years from now? Like, the positive message I'm giving you is, even if you are literally Tess Begg, even if Tess Begg is watching this right now, or you are someone who has been living a life similar to Tess Begg for the last 5 years, think about the person you could be 5 years from now. You could be someone whose opinion matters in the civil war in Myanmar, or at City Hall in the city you live in, or in a different city hall somewhere else in the world you've never been to, in a language you don't even speak yet. I mean, guys, I've talked a lot about moving to Los Angeles. What if instead I moved to Guatemala? Just to give you an example. So today I speak zero Spanish, zero. And you guys are going to see me practicing the Spanish language. Zero. I do not know the Spanish verb for to have or the Spanish verb for to be. Like French, I'm at a certain level. German, I'm at a certain level. Like there are many other languages where Spanish is zero. Do you guys think I would be incapable of making my political opinion matter in Guatemala 5 years from now? Starting today from zero. Melissa, what we were talking about, El Salvador. Woo! Politics in El Salvador. You don't think, I mean, again, it doesn't even matter. Like, I could start here. Like, I don't have to move to El Salvador first. I could spend the next 2 years getting deeper and deeper into Salvadorian politics here at my desk in Canada, get fluent in Spanish, or get as good at Spanish as I can do. And then I can move to El Salvador and try to roll heavy. You think just me as one intellectual, no friends, no contact, no movement, nothing behind me. You think it wouldn't create ripples? I already did that in Vientiane, Laos. I mean, I've done that in different countries. I know I had some political impact on the fate of the tiny nation of Laos and the capital city, Vientiane. Like you can show up. I also remember there was one Polish guy I talked to about that, about his own the political consequences of what he'd stood up for. Both he and I were really interested in ecology. So it was interesting to compare notes on that. No, you think one person, one intellectual can't make a difference in El Salvador? El Salvador, Guatemala. And I'm pointing out, I have no advantage. I don't even speak Spanish today. Probably most of you in the audience speak more Spanish than I do. I'm at zero, right? But what if you're Tess Begg? If Tess Begg moves to El Salvador, she can't do shit except take a fucking photograph of her ass on the beach in front of a sunset. That is the fucking upper limit of what Tess Begg can do. And in the next 5 years, it's not going to be so cute. She's getting older. We all are. Where's she going to be 5 years from now? Where's she going to be 10 years from now? If you are Kristen Leo, Kristen, I fucking defy you. Go to El Salvador. What the fuck can you do? Right? And obviously, El Salvador, like politically, it's in a tough situation. But, it's not as dangerous as Libya. It's not as dangerous as Syria. It's not as dangerous as Myanmar. It's not as dangerous as Cambodia. Really, your life is not going to be in danger in El Salvador, Guatemala, in the way it would be. Actually, Egypt. You want to get involved in Egyptian politics? Woo, high risk. This can be the end of your life easily. You can end up martyred if you want to fuck around with Egyptian politics. No question. Anyway, sorry, I'm just saying I don't trivialize this. But, the problem is that Kristen Leo hasn't developed herself intellectually in any respect in the last 5 years. And that's why she can't do that, in the next 5 years, right? Or if she can't, prove me wrong. Hit the books, Kristen, and maybe you can do that. Like maybe starting now, if Tess Beck or Kristen Leo give it 110%. And yes, when you do that, if you do that, anything meaningful, anything interesting in your life, people will want to go out to lunch with you. Women will find you interesting if you're a man. Men will find you interesting if you're a woman. I can't promise you're going to have an amazing sex life, and maybe you won't. Maybe you have other problems. But that is the fundamental basis. That's the start. And in my opinion, that's the whole incel movement is coping with. And obviously, like, their fantasy is that there's a beautiful woman out there who is going to appreciate them while they sit on the couch playing video games and watching anime, while making no effort to be a better person or no effort to make the world a better place. That's what they want. They want a woman who's going to love them just the way they are. And women love men. They don't love children. They don't love an adult man who still lives like a child. That's not what any woman is looking for. They're not looking for a man who is still doing anime and cosplay and video games. Anyway, sorry, like, obviously all these things you can get away with having a little bit of video games in your life or a little bit of anime in your life. I don't think I have to digress to do that. It's not that every woman is looking for a intellectual Superman who's totally devoted to that. But obviously, the social and political context we're in is not one in which I have to make that argument. I have to make the moderate argument for moderate self-indulgence. The problem is we're drowning in self-indulgence. And, people would rather engage in murder. They'd rather engage in terrorism in the name of this doomed political movement than, deal with these real problems personally or scaling up and politically or otherwise. You know what I'm saying? So I just want to say again, so guys, I am going to read more of your comments. This is a good time to comment, and I will actually read what you say. The Unabomber, he published books just within the last couple of years. So I'm sorry, I forget to what extent they were published in 2021 or 2020, but he published several books just recently. And people are reading them, people are talking about them. And I did some research, I considered reading those books in order to criticize them here on YouTube in terms of something that's going on. So that's a whole political movement built on murder. Now, the Unabomber, he was an incel. And actually, his political and personal history has everything to do with inceldom before the term existed. The major crisis in his life, what drove him to live alone in the woods, and what drove him to become a terrorist, and drove him to reject teaching at a university campus, was his inability to get laid. Now, I know what I'm about to say sounds unbelievable. You can Google it. You can read it. This is very easy to back up with innumerable published sources. You may not know this, but the Unabomber was a heterosexual who spoke to medical doctors about undergoing transgender surgery. And this shows how really mentally disabled the guy was. His reasoning was that he was a heterosexual man who couldn't get laid. So therefore, if they could surgically transform him into a woman, he would have an easier time. He'd be able to get laid. Like, he'd be able to gratify his instincts as a heterosexual man by undergoing plastic surgery that would make him a woman. And then he'd have sex with men, right? Like, sorry, if you like, and like the level of misconception here. So like you're going to take a heterosexual man who's lonely and is an incel, you're going to give him uh, silicone breast implants, right? Like that's what we're talking about, and then he's going to have sex with a man. Like there's so many things wrong with this. But he actually went in and did the interviews. There's a process of interviewing with doctors before you can set up an appointment and undergo that kind of transgender surgery. And at that time, this is many decades ago, sorry, I forget when this was, that you can imagine that screening process was more demanding than we had to talk to a psychiatrist and establish, look, are you really the right candidate for this surgery? I do hear things that today, so many of the doctors are so encouraging that people are just rapidly waved through, or encouraged to get transgender surgery right away without this kind of psychological scrutiny. Anyway, this was actually crucial to his breakdown, to his deciding that the whole university was evil, that the whole academic establishment was evil, and that the whole of society, as he defined it, was evil, and to go into seclusion and go into rebellion. However, we have his diaries. As I recall, he wrote them in code. He wrote encrypted diaries. And this yearning, his incel rage against society, it didn't stop. It didn't end. Like he kept writing in his diary how much it would mean to him just to have a woman to hold his hand. Like even if he had a relationship that wasn't sexual, if there was a woman who could love him. And this is just very psychologically telling. Once when he was a little kid, an older woman told him, just flattery as given to a little kid, told him that he was very handsome, that he was extraordinarily good looking. And he clung to this. He clung to this compliment his whole life. And he thought of himself as extraordinarily good looking and wrote about himself as extraordinarily good looking. And it's exactly like the incel philosophy, the incel mentality. He was blaming society that he, even though he was this extraordinarily good looking man, couldn't find a woman and couldn't get laid and didn't have any romantic options. And this is because of the conspiratorial evil nature of our society, which I need not digress into, but it's the same kind of strange world hating delusion that incels sink into, which, as I say, is different from self-pity. It's different from sitting down and analyzing, why am I so sad, and really dealing with that, right? World building fantasy, delusionary fantasy, paranoid, fantasy is, and, he talked to very few people. But then he had one conversation with one woman whom he somehow befriended. And he asked her about this. So this is just one conversation. One old woman was nice to him when he was a little kid and said, oh, you're really handsome. Some people say that to kids all the time. It doesn't mean anything. Some people just say encouraging things. They tell little girls they're pretty and tell little boys they're handsome, and it doesn't mean anything. But he'd clung to this notion that he was extremely handsome. And then he had one conversation with one woman, and this is out when he's already a middle-aged man living in a cabin in the woods. He's already run away from the university and run away from most social contact. And he talked to a woman, and she was just very perplexed by what he said about himself. And she told him, apparently her wording, she told him that he was run of the mill. Like, he wasn't ugly, but what do you mean? You're a run of the mill looking guy. You're not, And this had a huge, devastating impact on him. He had clung to this notion that he was extraordinarily handsome and was really entitled to the adoration of women. And again, he's so screwed up that he actually signed up for plastic surgery to transform himself into a woman, even though he was in no way homosexual. And I'm saying he was in no way even a transgender person. He wasn't into cross-dressing. It was just this delusion of that he could get laid this way. I'm sorry, for some of you, if you've never heard this stuff before, I realize how bizarre it sounds, but trust me, you can Google it. It's just the truth. This was the political and psychological and sexual experience that created this terrorist, the Unabomber. He really is kind of the original incel terrorist. So his rejection of society, his notion of his own superiority and entitlement, and I just add as a significant footnote, we do not know if he was autistic, is, because he's still alive, he's still writing books, and he may in the next 10 years be more politically influential. I don't know. Obviously, I think his political philosophy is incredibly stupid, but not everyone sees it that way. He was enraged by the sound of lawnmowers on other people's property. And that's very typical for autistic people. I have one friend who is autistic. I don't have a lot of friends who are autistic. And I've just mentioned I have several fans of the channel. Like, they're not my friends, but they write to me, they talk to me, who are autistic. And very often those are really the criteria that give it away. The inability to cope with the feeling of your shirt collar, it's called ambient sensitivity to things, the inability to cope with certain kinds of noises, those tend to be. So look, I do not know to what extent was the Unabomber just an incredibly stupid person, and to what extent did he actually have a condition like autism, like an actual form of mental retardation. I could tell other details here related to his very strange sort of stupidity. But yeah, I ask you, when you look at the messaging about ecology today, when you look at the messaging about global warming today, when you look at the messaging about veganism today, and I have been actively warning against this for like 8 years, when you are delivering these messages, yes, to young people, but also the middle-aged and older people, when you are telling people this is the end of the world and this is this crisis, you have to make a difference in it. There have already been science fiction movies made about this. The Army of 12 Monkeys movie, terrible movie, don't see it. I only saw a few minutes of it. But that was a mainstream movie starring Bruce Willis. It was a Bruce Willis action science fiction movie. There have already been science fiction movies made about this, that the same ecological hysteria that the Unabomber fastened onto, well, as I say, really, it's this kind of incel rage that's motivating his downward spiral. It's my analysis, but there's a lot of evidence to back it up. His own sexual crisis of identity, and his sense of intellectual superiority, and his sense of moral superiority, and even his sense he thought he was an incredibly handsome person. His sense of superiority was that he was entitled to these things and couldn't get them, and this fueled it. You tell me, aren't we sitting on a powder keg? Aren't we sitting on a time bomb? Isn't it just a matter of time until someone does for veganism what these few maniacs did for the incel movement, right? Where that becomes the face of the definitive political significance of what incel means. Like, obviously, it's easy to imagine if those killings hadn't happened, if those massacres hadn't happened, you could have a totally different discourse about incels that had never been in the newspaper headlines, right? Well, isn't it just a matter of time now? Whether it's someone responding to the instigation of Roger Hallam at Extinction Rebellion, I have many videos criticizing Roger Hallam, or someone responding to the instigation of Gary Yourofsky, or numerous other radical voices. And look, like, in a sense, this already happened with the Unabomber. It's just that the Unabomber wasn't vegan. Like, we're lucky. The Unabomber was an insane ecologist, but he killed and ate rabbits. He spent all his fucking time chopping up rabbits. It's horrible. I think also deer once in a while, but as I understand, his diet was mostly rabbit. So he lives in the woods in this horrible cabin, spattered with blood, where he slaughters wild animals. He was one of those crazy guys. Well, it's not even something new. What already happened with the vegan movement, pardon me, what already happened with the incel movement, what already happened with the Unabomber, it's very easy to predict that sooner or later, somewhere in the world, there's going to be just one crazy guy, if not 10, who takes away the narrative from us forever, where we don't get to define what veganism is and what it should be anymore, because just one massacre, just one act of violence has drawn the lines in the sand for us all. Babe, if you want to talk about that, so I'm going to now read the comments, but I just say, for me, these are really genuinely the same issue. But I know, we've covered a lot of ground, but hey, this is à-bas-le-ciel.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to this discussion about the Unabomber, that in his thought process about not being able to get laid, he decided to discuss with a surgeon this transgender surgery.
But also psychiatrists, just mentioning it.
And a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he was,
but it has a lot to do with psychiatrists. Go on, yeah.
it's so illogical. If the pool of people interested in being with you as a heterosexual man was as small as it was,
right?
Why would it be a larger pool of people who are interested in you being a transgender woman?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a level of no. I just want to.
I'm not claiming it makes sense. Go on. Yeah. Right. Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's totally illogical, irrational thought process going on there, or lack of thought process, really. Just emotional thinking on his part because he's lonely, right?
We have a saying in English: "The grass is greener on the other side of the hill." But go on. Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that this is just a level of selfishness too. That I remember an old video of yours where you were discussing this concept of being somebody's in the transgender community, where you expect the other person in the relationship to have that desire for somebody who is transgender. Sorry if I'm not making much sense, but like, when you're in a relationship with somebody, you can't be thinking totally selfishly about your desires. You have to be thinking, does the other person desire this? Yeah. So in the Unabomber's case, okay, who is going to be in a situation where they're desiring this person, and what do you bring to them? What do you bring into their life? And it's this very self-centered thinking that I see also in other videos that I've seen of incels that are talking about, feeling so lonely, or like you mentioned, I wish I just had somebody to hold my hand. Well, okay, can you instead think of what you can bring to somebody else? Right. And isn't that more meaningful than just somebody holding your hand? And it's more childish to think, well, I just need somebody with me to not be alone. And that is not attractive. I agree with you in that sense, that women are attracted to men, and women are not attracted to children.
Yeah, men, not boys, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in a sense, so I know this is not not on the point that you were just ending with about, eventually something will happen in the vegan community. Some vegan will incite some violence. Like that. That is concerning to me too. And I agree. We are at the stage where you said recently it's molten lava. It's not. Yes,
right.
Not lava.
Yeah. No, it's liquid metal as opposed to solid steel.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No. It's still a good image. Molten lava as opposed to solid stone. It works just as well.
Yeah.
It's still malleable. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And we have to, the people who are trying to think 100 years in advance, like people are thinking, well, what is the future of life on planet Earth ecologically? What is the future of life on planet Earth in terms of animal suffering? The people that we want to have their voices heard, we want veganism to be viewed as a rational movement, something that something that can really make a difference in the world, rather than this type of impetus to massacre. This is what's going to make something important. That's terrible. That's the wrong way to go about this. And it's also, in a sense, it's childish. It's ridiculous to think that this is going to, in the same way that protesting with signs on the street and yelling is also childish to think like, well, if I scream loud enough, or if I chant loud enough with my group of friends, then something will change. Then the governor will change his mind, and make some pass some legislation.
But so I want to stick on that. Yeah. Just to be fair to the other side, and I'm sure you felt this during your childhood if you grew up. Part of the problem is that we're constantly being shown on television examples to the contrary, even if they're 1 in a million or they're 1 in a billion. You know what I mean? Now, I can, way back when I was a small child, this is a really small child, you look at TV and it seems like people play the guitar and become famous and wealthy all the time, right? Now, again, I was a pretty cynical kid. I didn't believe in that form, but it's completely understandable, just given the way, whether it's newspapers or television or radio, the way in which they are selecting out that one person in a million and showing you that kind of extraordinary success again and again and again. You might think that just anyone could be an Olympic athlete. Also, growing up, you might think anyone could be okay, but in the same way, whether you're talking about violent political protest or nonviolent, right? That you're seeing the counterexamples again and again, very often with false causality assigned to them. So, you will have a headline that says Vietnam War ends, and you'll literally have a photograph of attractive women in bikinis with, flowers painted on their body. Like, sexy teenagers protesting in streets when Vietnam War ends. This completely false cause and effect relationship is presented to you again in newspapers and on even we saw a news item this morning, like this totally false sense of how politics works is presented to you. And also that it's the one exception. It's the one case out of 1,000. It's the one case out of 1,000,000. Now, I'm not going to get into a lengthy, deep critique of the media this way. There were news broadcasts about the pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong saying, hey, it's working, it's working, it's working. And then you don't get news broadcasts saying it's failing, it's failing, it's failing, right? Like just chronologically, even if you were optimistic for the first few days of those protests in Hong Kong, after a certain point, you should have been reporting on and examining the extent to which it's failing. Myanmar, it was like just over 1 year ago. It hasn't gone on for that long. The current protest in Myanmar. But in some ways, the history of Myanmar goes back thousands of years. But the current phase of the pro-democracy movement in Myanmar, again, this is all fresh in my memory. You got this news reporting saying it's working, it's working, it's working, and then just really briefly, you get this. It's not really working. You don't get an in-depth, interested analysis of the failure. So now, this isn't exactly the same as talking about the way in which musicians become celebrities, right? I mean, they're not the same. But I'm pointing out there's a similar kind of misperception of reality that from childhood forward seems natural. Now, mea culpa. In this video, I have mentioned the example of just 2 people in the incel movement who engaged in massacres, and they've changed the whole Western world. They've had a huge impact. There's no way to understate or overstate that. These were 2 acts of violence, I would just say massacre, transformed political discourse, including, it was mentioned Jordan Peterson. People like Jordan Peterson, they've been talking about it and caring about it. I'm saying conservatives, left-wing people, feminists. What's been going on in feminism has certainly been galvanized and transformed. This is huge, huge impact. So, that also is cherry picking. How many massacres have happened in Bolivia? How many massacres have happened in Colombia? How many massacres have happened in Cambodia? We have one Cambodian in the audience. Shout out to Loic Ann. And there's no such impact. Whatever. Even Myanmar. How many people are being snuffed out in Myanmar? How many people are being killed in communist China? You can have massacres this is like only looking at the tiny minority of musicians or actors or that have a huge impact, sometimes with very little effort. Sometimes you can talk about a song that was recorded live. So actually, a great example, and this is kind of ridiculous, but there was one stand-up comedian who made one joke about Bill Cosby, and it wasn't even a funny joke. He just stood there on stage saying, look, it's crazy that Bill Cosby got away with rape. If you guys don't remember, there was just one moment, and that clip got picked up. It wasn't the first time he'd said it. It had been part of his routine for quite a while. It was really, it wasn't even really a joke. It was really in the middle of a stand-up comedy routine, pointing the finger at Bill Cosby and saying, this is ridiculous. It's had tremendous consequences, at least within American politics. I think Bill Cosby doesn't matter as much in Europe as he does in America. So, he doesn't matter as much in Cambodia, that's for sure. But the criminalization of Bill Cosby, put it that way, it's had tremendous knock-on consequences, and it still is. So, to my knowledge, I haven't watched it. There's a new documentary film series that's coming out right now saying, I believe the title is We Have to Talk About Bill Cosby. But I haven't seen it. I'm not going to make time to see it. But yeah, this is something of tremendous importance. The death of George Floyd. Well, a lot of people get killed by the cops. A lot of people die in strange circumstances. This is my point, is that it's very easy to convince yourself that violent protest will work, whether you're looking at the Unabomber or the incel movement. It's very easy to justify your mind. And it's also easy to convince yourself that sexy standing on the sidewalk in a bikini holding a banner protest work. It's I think for my audience, I've made so many videos talking about this, you already know why it's ludicrous to think that way. And even if you sympathize with the protest, I just had film footage on my channel, whatever it was, a couple days ago. I had film footage of these people standing and holding a sign saying, "We want democracy in Myanmar." Is that how they created democracy in ancient Athens? Is that how it happened in ancient Rome? Is that what it's really? I mean, I'm sorry, you can read Machiavelli's discourses. It's chilling the way he talks about huge numbers of people dying. And Machiavelli is telling you straight up, you want to have a democratic republic, you want to have a semi-democratic republic. Because for the most part, Machiavelli is talking about a mixed democracy, a hybrid republic. It's not as democratic as Athens was, but it has aspects. You want that? Machiavelli tells you straight up, you have to be willing to kill and die in large numbers, and not just in one civil war, but again and again. That's the lesson he took from ancient Rome. You know what I mean? It's chilling. Oh, and sorry, if this is too abstract for you, you want democracy in Cuba? You want democracy in Syria? Really? You want democracy in Libya? You want democracy in Cambodia? It's not going to be holding a sign. It's not. This is not how it happens. So yeah, I'm just fleshing that out a little bit. Yes, it's preposterous. I mean, what is more preposterous? The idea that you're going to bring about the ecological transformation of society through terrorism, or the idea that you're going to bring about a kind of transformation in gender politics. That's a good way to summarize what the incels are on about through terrorism. But in the same way that we're conditioned to regard successful movie stars, successful musicians, like the 1 in a million is made, the holotype, the extraordinary exception is made into the standard and the norm. The exceptions to the rules in politics, the 1 in a million is made the norm. And then also, as I say, the cause and effect relationship is totally misrepresented and glamorized again and again. So that's sadly the framework we're working within, I'll say more if you're going to say more. I mean, I realize I was partly responding to what you're saying and partly taking a different direction. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I'm just aware, the impact of seeing those examples on television, and even the responsibility that journalists have in covering these events. And, how many people work in Congress that never get featured in the news, or if they do, the changes that they've made are relatively minor, and they don't become famous. Whereas the incel killer has become a famous person.
Well, just to give an example, think about how sobering that is. Think about how many people have become, say, the mayor of San Francisco, and they've never had the political impact of these violent. Yeah. You can pick any example, but if right now for you, if you want to become the mayor of San Francisco, 20 years from now, if you have a 20-year plan to become the mayor of San Francisco or almost any city or town, that's really a tough road to get on. Oh, but then they have to stand there and say, oh, well, I've had less of a political importance than than these terrible people who are engaged in terrorism. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Just a couple days ago, it was because I happened to see that one of the mayors of Flint had passed away. So he wasn't the current mayor, but I had never heard of him before, to be honest with you, even though I grew up so close to Flint, Michigan. It's just in this way, I want people to recognize within the media, what we choose to talk about, that making these people out to be more important than they are. Also, it influences the rest of the history of the world in a way that, like you said, in Colombia, there have been massacres in this span of time that we've been dealing with mass shootings in America, but that hasn't been making the headlines. It hasn't been making history in the way that these incels have. So, sorry.
No, look, I agree with you. So I'm just managing the comment section while you're talking. I used the example of Extinction Rebellion, who have not yet engaged in bloodshed, shall we say. They have not yet engaged in a massacre. I've warned again and again, if you just listen to the lectures they're giving, and Roger Hallam is going to university campuses and saying to some teenagers are stupid and some are mentally retarded. We've been talking about this, to what extent some of these people are mentally disabled and who engage in acts of violence this way. well, some people are stupid and some people are extreme. And if you look at what he's telling people, he's really talking them into, frankly, terrorism. That's my analysis of what he's saying. Sorry, I have film clips of him where he's making the comparison to September 11th. And I say, look, think about what he's saying. Think about how that's going to sound. Like maybe a really intelligent person has a sophisticated perspective on it. Like, oh, okay, in some ways, this is like September 11th, and in some ways, it's not. Well, not everyone's that abstract and sophisticated. Like some people are going to hear this segment of what he's saying about September 11th. They're going to think that's what they should do. They should do something really violent like this. I've raised I've raised the concern that there are hardworking, honest people who became the mayor of a small town. And they say, well, why doesn't my opinion about ecology matter? And his does. Now there are other comparisons. Elon Musk is an imbecile. Why is it that what Elon Musk says matters so much more than a congressman, than a senator, than a parliamentary, a backbench parliamentary official, a parliamentarian, elected member of parliament, whatever you say? Why is it Elon Musk's opinion and some activist who blocks the streets, or perhaps an activist who engages in terrorism, or the Unabombers? Why is it their opinion matters more, certainly, than the vast majority of people who engage in our semi-democratic systems and work their way up to the top that way? Now, part of the answer is exactly because our systems are only semi-democratic. I think there are very good reasons why people don't respect their congressmen. People don't care what the Senate has to say. They don't, and they care about what Elon Musk has to say. They care about what Kim Kardashian has to say. It's not for no reason. If you were closer to the Athenian ideal, I think you would have a kind of democracy where people are really involved, and where it's people, the people who are like Kim Kardashian in your life are the demagogues at the Pnyx. Also politics in Athens was shallow in some ways. Every single chapter in Plutarch's Lives, it always talks about how handsome these guys were. We were reading the life of Alcibiades, but any of the political leaders in Athens, it mattered that they were handsome. It mattered that they were well. I'm just mentioning, politics is not all profound.
On the level that we have our power, that we have the ability to express our voice, we don't do it.
And that's right.
Look,
that's right.
I agree with you.
And that's why people are incels, and that's why they're that's why they become crazy terrorists like the Unabombers.
Yes. So, but what you were talking about long ago now, you were saying that. Oh gosh, there's just so much to cover here. But I just say, you can go to your local zoning meeting.
Yes.
At the town hall, but people are not doing that, and most of the people that are there are old, overweight, just doddering old people that just don't want things to change. They just are afraid of change in their society. They probably have old racist ideas about just the community, what they want in their community. This is a major issue, and the level that we do have democracy, in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, how many people are really attending these meetings? How many people really care? And I just want to say, I understand what you were saying earlier too, that you choose your own burden, the burden that you carry. You don't feel beholden to be a politician in Toronto just because you grew up in Toronto. You have taken on these political ideologies that matter way more to you than
and what matters is what matters to me. That ultimately it's my decision, whether it's going to be Cambodia or El Salvador or whatever. But it could be Toronto and it could be Chicago too. Go on,
But if you attend those small meetings, you do actually have the ability to make waves. You can really get your voice heard.
So look, I agree, and I've had the experience. But I would say even more, this is kind of similar to the incel thing. Even if you fail, you're going to learn something from that failure, and you're going to gain a perspective that matters, right? So let's say it's Detroit, and you start getting involved in local politics in Detroit, and you decide these people are all idiots. I don't want anything to do with these people. This political process is whether it's that it's corrupt or it's not really democratic, or you have that experience. You have your analysis of it. You see what's wrong with it, even if it's a total failure at every step of the way. Right. For one thing, now you know that, And you can't read that in a university textbook on political science. Like even university level study of politics, they don't teach you that. They don't, like nowhere in the world. So, okay, now you've had that experience. And now, so you get pissed off. Again, this has to do a lot with self-pity. You feel sorry for yourself. And now you've got to start making some decisions along the lines of what next. So what next? Maybe you just move to another city. Maybe you move to a small town. Maybe you live in a cabin in the woods. Maybe you find a different way. Maybe you become a creative artist. You become a filmmaker. Maybe you say, you know what? I'm going to become a documentary filmmaker, and I'm going to show how fucked up City Hall is. I'm going to show a corrupt or democratic process. I'm going to show it's not democratic at all. It doesn't even have to be documentary film. You can do drama. You can make, fiction, where it's a fictional narrative showing the way elections really work in America and the way the negotiations at City Hall really work. And, where it's this kind of thing. You can respond to this in all kinds of different ways. So like you're talking about a situation where failing is worth doing. The frustration is worth having. And then the analysis of the reflection on that failure, right? It's going to lead to something. It's going to lead to something positive.
Yeah.
And, sorry. So there's some intelligent comments here. Like somebody says here, Dangerous Kitty says, Eisel's argument assumes that even the biggest geek in the world can get some woman somewhere to marry them. And then I think he or she is adding, I guess for herself, quote, and if incels could accept that they'll never get Margot Robbie, they can at least get somebody. Yeah. Anyway, Margot Robbie's an interesting example. Margot Robbie can't get me. I'm just being real with you. I would not fuck Margot Robbie. She's below my standards. I would be rejecting her. Real talk. If you haven't watched the other 2 hours of this video, watch the rest of it, and you'll get why. But I know, I know why you're picking the example. The guys have to give up the delusion they can get with Margot Robbie, but I'm in a position where Margot Robbie can't get with me. Okay, but if you are going to City Hall and getting frustrated and failing and analyzing why, and then you're starting some new project, whether it's a creative project or whether you say, you know what, I'm going to learn Spanish and go to El Salvador, or I'm going to learn Cambodian, go to Cambodia, I'm going to take on other things I can struggle with. We've given all these examples. Or you decide, you know what, City Hall is corrupt and hopeless and there's no democracy, so I'm going to get involved with feeding the homeless. Like it could be, you're going to do some kind of charity project that builds you up that way. Like there are so many different ways to respond positively to the lack of democracy. You see what I'm saying? Like I'm just saying this thing because Melissa was saying, well, if you do get involved in democracy, you can still make some difference. And my answer is maybe. And maybe, but my point is, even if that's not your experience, even if your experience is that you can't make a difference, and then you engage in analysis of why, that leads to something positive. But so Kitty, this person's using the name Kitty, that's the sense in which I think you can win, right? In your personal life, in your romantic life, also by developing yourself intellectually in response to, those challenges again and again and again. And, all of these things involve other people who are engaged in the same meaningful struggle you're engaged in. Like doing humanitarian work, I'm just using this easy to visualize. Even if it's just literally feeding the homeless, you set up that kind of humanitarian foundation. You're going to meet people who find you interesting and they want to have lunch with you. And I'm not saying you do this intentionally as a way to meet members of the opposite sex, but I think you can imagine, even if you have lunch with an elderly couple, like it's a married couple, and they're also doing this kind of humanitarian work, and you're an interesting, intelligent person, you're disciplined intellectual doing this political act and this charitable act, they'll probably say, you know what? We have a granddaughter. They may not say it to you. They try to introduce you their granddaughter and things. It brings people into your life who actually respect you intellectually, who actually respect you ethically, and who want to be a part of your life in a meaningful way, And I'm glad, by the way, I see that Sullen Potato was not too offended by my thoroughgoing response to his or her comments earlier. We're left to guess the gender of Sullen Potato. Another interesting comment from Selling Potato, quote, imagine if these highly intellectual people committed to improving this aspect of themselves instead of choosing not to because it's difficult. They could contribute so much more to their communities. You can see, I mean, this is someone who just has a totally different set of values from me, a totally different perspective on the world. So, Selling Potato, I notice you say that I'm beholden to my community, or we're beholden to our communities. Why not my grandparents? Why not my parents? Why not my ancestors? Like, that would be more of a traditional Chinese view of the world. Like, you should study Confucius. You should develop yourself intellectually so that you can do honor to the ghosts of your deceased ancestors. So, because like you're beholden to your parents and your grandparents. Why don't you work hard and develop yourself intellectually so you can contribute to your own parents? Right now, we don't think that way. But I'm taking the next step and saying, look, I have no obligation to my parents. I have no obligation to my grandparents. I have no obligation to the city of Toronto or the city of Chicago, right? Like and this doesn't mean I live a life without obligations. I recognize that the obligations I have are the obligations I choose. And those obligations can change. And the good news is that taking on those obligations will change me also, right? Now, the other thing I find fault with here is Selling Potato, where again, your view of the world is just incompatible with mine. It's just very different. You notice this comment begins by saying, imagine if these highly intellectual people did X, did this or that. Nobody intrinsically is a highly intellectual person, right? It's Melissa 5 years ago. I mean, she was talking about it herself earlier. Who was Melissa 5 years ago? Who was Melissa 10 years ago, right? You build this up brick by brick. Who I am today is the result of a process, brick by brick. And by the way, there are aspects of my intellectual development I neglected. I was talking to Melissa yesterday about to what extent should we spend some time on math? Because I used to have jobs where I did math all day, every day. And you build it up, you build it quickly. Well, now for many, many years, I've neglected my ability in math. It's not some great tragedy in my life, but you have to recognize these things. There are ways in which intellectually I've let myself degenerate. There are ways in which I've pressed forward. It can't be everything. I never learned to play a musical instrument. I never learned to drive a car. There are ways in which I just never developed skills and so on and so forth. But I'm rejecting this idea that you're born an intellectual, that this is part of your character, whether fixed by birth or by the social class your parents, by anything else. I am radically optimistic that Kristen Leo and Tess Begg and Ali Hardesty, all of these people could be intellectuals. They could become intellectuals in just 5 years if they wanted to, right? If they gave it 110%, And I mean, again, obviously, I can use male examples too, and they're even more saddening. And a lot of them are guys I've communicated with and I've spoken to directly. But who would James Aspie be today if just 5 years ago, he'd started watching this YouTube channel? I know James Aspie has seen this YouTube channel. I don't have to get into why, but I'm less than 6 degrees of separation from these people. What if he had taken seriously the message of this YouTube channel and started leading an intellectual life? James Aspie's life, to my knowledge now, it consists of lifting weights. It consists of smoking marijuana. I believe he identifies as someone who smokes marijuana every day, but if not nearly so, he's a heavy, regular marijuana smoker. And intellectually, he has just completely degenerated. He's gotten stupider and stupider as he's gotten older. He's more and more ignorant. He's more and more pathetic intellectually. Physically, he still looks good with his shirt off. He can still pose. That's exactly what he does. He stands on the beach in his underwear or in his bathing suit and he poses. He's kept together that way. I don't know for how long. And I don't know if he uses steroids and other performance enhancers. I don't know if he uses testosterone booster. That's the most common one now is so-called TRT, testosterone boosting therapy but it really is the same thing as steroids. Gear is gear, people. And boosting your testosterone to superhuman levels, it is what's known. It's what's thought of as steroids, even though on a chemical level, it's a different type of chemical from steroids. I don't know if he does that. I don't know if he'll keep doing that. like. I don't know that physical side of it. But, James Aspie is a terrifying example of what it's like to grow old when you embrace the unexamined life, when you embrace this unintellectual, anti-intellectual life that is just not worth living. And so just to give him credit, James Aspie is reaching out for a more meaningful life. He is trying in his way to be a political leader and an intellectual. That's what makes it so tragic. He's trying to be a leader for the vegan movement. He's trying to convince, he has his own political and ecological aspirations. And he even tried, as I discussed at length, he tried to be a kind of financial and economic leader. He's tried to do other things. But, the desire and the yearning is there. The attempt and the motivation is there. But instead, someone asked in the audience, why do you keep mentioning El Salvador? Why don't you pick up a newspaper, okay? Why don't you get up to date with the news from El Salvador? There's a lot going on politically. El Salvador is a really interesting place right now, okay? What do you mean? What could be more important for us to talk about than El Salvador? All these examples matter to me. I care about the political future of El Salvador. I care about the political future of Cambodia. Like it doesn't mean nothing to me. All right, just catching up with your comments, and then I think we're going to call it a wrap. If you guys have a second, hit the thumbs up. As I say, it helps people discover the video when it goes into cold storage here on YouTube. Yeah. So we get some more comments from Sullen Potato saying that he agrees with a lot of what I'm saying, which is great. I'm happy to hear it. Yeah. So Sullen Potato makes an interesting point. One of Sullen Potato's points has been to say that I didn't live a solipsistic life as an intellectual, that I did things that mattered, like going to Cambodia to do research and humanitarian work. So it's a point. I mean, and I think that's part of our discussion about what the difference is between watching anime and doing something meaningful, no matter how low we set the requirement for something being meaningful. Because Shakespeare isn't that much more meaningful than anime, but it is. Shakespeare isn't that much more meaningful than playing video games, but it is. It's over this threshold. So I do think you can reflect further on the precise way in which my studying the Cambodian language and caring about Cambodian politics and going to Cambodia, the ways in which it's more meaningful than the things most incels are doing with their time, and most married men are doing it. Most married men don't complain about not getting laid, but they spend all their time watching sports on television, or maybe they watch anime too. There are married men who play video games and watch anime. Most people are wasting time. This is true. However, Sullen Potato, I've said this in other videos. This isn't the first time I'm saying this. My life in Cambodia was a failure. Like everything I wanted to do, everything I aspired to, everything I tried to do in Cambodia failed. Now, there's a very positive element to that. I was just describing, you go to City Hall, you get involved in democracy, and you fail and fail and fail, but something positive.
Yeah, I will just say, my sense of optimism about that at the time, when I made that comment that, we could be using our voices democratically in these small City Hall meetings, is based on the fact that I didn't do it myself.
Yes.
I have to say that.
Right. No, and this is an interesting, it's instructive, because the contrast is, I say, well, if you do that, you're probably going to fail, but that can be really rewarding anyways. This is different.
Contrast, you were involved in the Green Party at
yes,
yeah.
You
did it.
I got involved in politics at several levels.
I'm speaking out of having no experience politically, really, in the real world, but you have a lot more political experience.
Right. But I would just mention, Melissa, you've seen, I totally forget the woman. There was the woman from Saginaw, Michigan. Yeah. So Carly Hammond, she's a YouTuber and political person. Who responded to me once on Facebook, but only once. She didn't want to talk. It's cool. Whether you think of Carly Hammond in Saginaw, Michigan, or you think of the Young Turks, there are YouTube channels that show you what it's like to try to participate in elections and try to participate at City Hall, or again, elections and democracy at any level. And nothing is the same as doing it yourself or feeling yourself. But my point is, I think almost all of them are failures. All of them are showing you failing. So I'm just saying, the way I talk about Cambodia, likewise, I really talk about it as a failure, but as a somewhat meaningful failure. So I'm not being a cynic here. I'm not being catty, but did I save one person's life in Cambodia? No. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not the case that I saved a human life. Now, conversely, it's possible to be like work in the medical field, to be an EMT or something, work as a nurse or work on an ambulance, and you did go to Cambodia and save someone's life, but it's really kind of meaningless. And if you hadn't done it, someone else would have been on the job that day. Like, where it really doesn't mean like, yeah, you went to Cambodia and you saved this guy's life, but if you hadn't been here, someone else would have been driving the ambulance that day, and who gives a fuck? And nothing really came. Like, so the saving the life thing is in some ways, deceptive. And in terms of outcomes, now I don't want to get into the details. Yes, the work I did in Cambodia did have some impact on the world, did have some real outcomes. But even if it didn't, even if we say, look, Eisel's research and humanitarian work and what he tried to do, even if we say it failed to such an extent that it had zero impact on the world, which it didn't. I just don't want to get into cataloging my accomplishments and what difference, but there was some impact. There was some difference in the world. But my point is, this is still good. It's still meaningful. It's still positive, even if there are no positive consequences for society, for a community. And that's why I refuse to talk about this stuff as being beholden to your community as an intellectual. And I certainly don't think you're beholden to the consequences, to the outcomes this way. Like, it may sound surreal, but like, you can get involved with feeding starving people, like one of the simplest forms of charity, and you fail to feed even one starving person. Like, your whole charity, your whole political movement is a failure. I mean, I know it's difficult to imagine something being a total failure that way, but I've read about case studies. I've looked at case studies. You can have charities that accomplish none of their goals, and still, especially in the context of this conversation, we're still talking about developing yourself intellectually, leading a meaningful life. I mean, guess what? You don't accomplish anything watching anime or playing video games. So, in a really weird sense, I'm kind of focused on the worst case scenario and pointing out how wonderful it is. And it's true. I do think of my own experience. It's not false humility. I think of it as a failure and so on. Okay, so Dangerous Kitty has made a series of comments. And again, I sympathize, but it's kind of important for me to emphasize the way in which I disagree with you. So Dangerous Kitty says, quote, I might be able to agree with Eisel if you define intellectual development broadly to mean being as knowledgeable as a person of average intelligence can be in some important topic. So again, I don't think of intelligence as a static trait like height. I can't be taller and I can't be shorter unless I have a horrific car accident. You know what I mean? Like this, after a certain age, you're as tall as you're going to be, and that's it. Okay. I just do not view intelligence that way. I view your intelligence as something you can develop, something you can extend. Are there limits to this? Yes. In many, many videos I've mentioned, I have one brother who was born mentally disabled. And if I haven't said it before, I'll say it now. To my knowledge, he was mentally disabled because his mother attempted suicide during the pregnancy. So it's really tragic, but as far as I know, it's not genetic in the sense of DNA. But his mother, who is not my mother, it's a different woman, attempted suicide during the pregnancy. And this is exactly what my father told me. And obviously it was one of the greatest tragedies in my father's life. We do not know to what extent my father's own psychological problems were a result of that experience, by the way. To be honest, I just don't give him that much credit. And I already know what a terrible person my father was before that, like in the years before that. So I don't treat my father as a victim of this at all. But nevertheless, so I look at, when I look at my brothers collectively, I can't say all of them are born with the same intellectual capacity I have, put it that way. However, to continue Dangerous Kitty's comment, quote, James Aspie couldn't do what you do, Eisel, nearly as well as you. I mean, it would be good if he read a book once in a while and didn't smoke weed. But nevertheless. Okay, but this is what I'm saying to you sincerely. This is with no false humility. And again, I look at most of my brothers who were not born retarded, my brothers who were not, their mother didn't attempt suicide during pregnancy. I look at the other brothers in my family, none of whom are intellectuals in any way. You know what I mean? You don't know how far he could take it. You don't know what a wonderful person he could be today intellectually if he had gotten on this path 5 years ago, if he had gotten this path 5 years ago. Like, you don't know, and he doesn't know either. Now, there is this YouTuber. There's nothing interesting about her. So unfortunately, if you look her up, you're going to be disappointed. There is this YouTuber called Ali Hardesty. And she was put on legal prescription methamphetamines at a shockingly early age. I'm sorry, I forget how old she was. But her parents took her to get assessed for attention deficit disorder. And she was given these pills. And basically, she was told she was stupid. She was always going to be stupid. And she needed these pills to help her cope with being stupid. She was given an excuse to not really study and not try hard and not develop herself intellectually. And, her being told that, her being given that diagnosis probably had a more profound influence on her life than the drugs. But the drugs have a big impact. The drugs being mentioned here, they are methamphetamines. They're legal. They're not illegal, but it's the government and the healthcare system giving methamphetamines. And, among other things, they ruin your sleep. So they do make you feel more jumpy and energetic during one part of the day, but they ruin both the quality of your sleep and the quantity of your sleep. They have quite a range of negative side effects. Now, in her case, I said this before she questioned methamphetamines, before she questioned her diagnosis with attention deficit disorder, before she questioned the drugs and the really negative impact they had on her life. Back when she was positive about them and was just making videos saying, hey, it's great, everyone needs to be on these drugs. And she was only saying positive things, but it made her life better. My assessment of her was that she was a person of normal intelligence, or to be honest, even a little bit above average intelligence. But she had been given an excuse to be a self-indulgent, lazy nitwit and to get on these drugs and get this drug habit going. And as a result, she dropped out of university. That she was definitely intelligent enough to complete a university education and whatever, And I'm just saying this honestly. If James Aspie did not live the lifestyle of James Aspie in all these ways, you don't know how far he could take it. You don't know how intelligent he could be. And I'm sorry, there's no one I can bring on camera to tell you what an idiot I was when I was 18 years old. 16 is even better or something. There were a lot of people. There were people who thought I was retarded. There were people who thought, people thought I was really stupid. I was dumb once. I was ignorant once. I had to work my way out of this. You don't know positively what James Aspie is capable of or what Ali Hardesty is capable of. And they don't know either, So are there limits? Are some people just born so mentally retarded? Say, I have this one brother. He's never spoken a word. He's never spoken a sentence in any language. His mental capacity is zero. He could never even go to primary school, let alone university. Okay, but with that footnote set aside, I don't buy it. And I just, I don't believe that there is this innate inequality that separates me from my own brothers, with the exception of the one who was born retarded. I don't believe there is this innate inequality that separates me from Ali Hardesty or James Aspie. That's why I'm so tough on them. That's why I'm so mean to them, is because I actually feel they can do what I do too. And, even if you say, well, it's a good way to put it. You say he couldn't do what you do as well. He couldn't do it nearly as well as you do. But in some ways, he would be better, right? Like if other people lead the life of the mind and develop themselves intellectually, they're going to have some strengths just as I have some weaknesses, And look, so again, this relates to what I think of as intelligence and what I think of as intellectual development. My areas of greatest intellectual weakness are the things that I find boring and where I cannot motivate myself, I cannot compel myself to do the research. Now, I'll give you an example that you guys will find interesting, and in a sense I do too. Okay, there are claims being made about the new solar power systems in South Australia, and Elon Musk is involved. Okay, so there's a lot of false propaganda, some of it coming from Elon Musk, some of it coming from the government. government of Australia. How fictional are the claims about this amazing new solar technology breakthrough? Another person who is at the same level of intelligence as me, or even a lower level of intelligence, just almost aesthetically, they might be able to throw themselves into researching all the details of that. And they may, like a certain kind of guy would have in his garage a bunch of solar panels and would, like he wouldn't just be doing the research, he'd be tinkering with it and he'd be really wanting to understand, like on an engineering level, the technology, even if his work had nothing to do with that. And where he'd want to come on YouTube and really talk about, okay, look, people are saying Elon Musk made this breakthrough, and here, like, get into crunching the numbers. Here's the amount of electricity being generated. Here's how much it costs. Go through the government budgets for this. Is it really what some newspaper headlines are saying? Now, as you can guess, I am suggesting to you that I'm very skeptical. I don't really believe that South Australia has made this breakthrough that newspapers are claiming they have. But I don't know. And I'm not motivated, to do that research. I'm not. To me, like in a sense, it's interesting, but in a sense, it's boring, right? So now maybe James Aspie, if he had developed himself intellectually for 5 years, in this sense, right, he might be really motivated to put in that work and get those. You see what I'm saying? Like, even if you only think of that as an aesthetic difference between us, people can be much less intelligent than me and kind of get better results and better outcomes. And there are going to be things they're better at, right? Why have I neglected my ability in math? I feel like in the last 20 years or something, there's really been nothing meaningful in my life connected to math. I'm sorry, let's say 10 years. I that's how I feel about it. And maybe I'm wrong. Like, maybe I'd be a better person today if I'd made math a priority instead of learning the Chinese language, which may be totally useless to me. Like, maybe I'm wrong that some of these other things I studied, I shouldn't have been studying if I'd instead been doing math or electrical engineering. And guys, I'm on no ego trip here, zero. I don't think I'm superior to people who get into electrical engineering. I don't. It's different. You know what I mean? And there are things I understand that they don't understand, and vice versa. There's some selective blindness on both sides. See what I'm saying? Yeah. And look, again, I'm a fan of the channel, Oliver. He has his own YouTube channel. He always likes to bring up Karl Popper's concept of falsifiability. I will be the first person to admit that what I have just said to you is not falsifiable. There is no way we can test the scientific hypothesis that if James Aspie lived my lifestyle, he could be smarter than me. Put it that way. There's no way we can test the hypothesis that in a 5-year period, Ali Hardesty could be positively motivated to develop herself intellectually and be as smart as me, or like whatever, however you're going to calibrate this test. There's no way we can test this or falsify it, even if we go back to my hypothetical example from hours ago now of 10 different soldiers in the army. And one of them is sincerely motivated to develop himself intellectually, and the other 9 are not. I can't even test the hypothesis. Would the other 9 be better soldiers if they were intellectually motivated like this guy? Like, we can't even do that, So I'm the first person to admit that what I'm saying here is dogmatic. What I'm saying here is optimistic. And as I say by mentioning my mentally retarded brother, sometimes what I'm saying is going to be wrong. Sometimes. And maybe the Unabomber is a great example of that. Like, maybe the Unabomber, he was just too stupid. Like, maybe he was literally retarded. Like, maybe he's just too stupid to ever benefit from education, the life of the mind, reading books, or anything else. So sometimes I'm wrong. But what I'm saying to you so passionately again and again is, how many times will I be right? In how many instances are we talking about someone who really could have benefited? Someone who could have transformed themselves, someone who could have transformed a small political movement like veganism, someone who could have changed the fate of nations, whether that's a tiny country like El Salvador, whether it's a small town or a big city, like it's the politics of Chicago, it's politics of that scale. How many people could have changed the world positively through the creative arts? Because again, the arts, they magnify the impact you have in the world. You're just one person and nobody cares about your opinion. You can sit around and feel sorry for yourself because your ideas don't matter. Well, your ideas matter if you make them matter. And if you just paint them in a picture, you create a beautiful painting, you create a work of art, all of a sudden your ideas start to matter. You make a song that's kind of catchy, and all of a sudden your ideas start to matter. You make a film, whether it's a documentary film or a fictional thing, your ideas matter in as much as you make them matter. We don't know about how many people I'm right. How many of these people, if they started leading a meaningful life, if they started prioritizing their intellectual development, they could change much, much more than their sex lives. They could change much, much more than their own personal happiness. And I'm sorry, but I can't help but repress my optimism. I mean, it's two sides of the same coin. When I go to a university campus today, what do I see? I see people living the unexamined life. I see people completely committed to short-term sensual self-indulgence. Nothing else. The university campus is full of people who only care about drugs, alcohol, getting laid, watching sports on TV. They may be playing on the sports team themselves. You have no idea how busy the gym is on university campus. You have no idea how underutilized the library is. You know what I mean? Like, for real. I've spent a lot of time on university campuses. And the extent to which today university students live like, middle-aged cocaine addicts, frankly. Like they're what middle-aged people used to be like in the 1980s. But they're still young. They're young, but they have no idealism. They have no higher aspirations. They're living for short-term self-gratification and self-indulgence. That's what you see on the university campuses. And I look at the professors. I mean, it's the difference between the conductor and the orchestra pit. All the same problems the students have, the professors are the same. I can't say it's the blind leading the blind. It's the same evil in the hearts and minds of the professors that you see in the students. Our university campuses are temples to self-indulgence. They're not a roadmap to the life of the mind. They're not leading you on the way to developing yourself as an intellectual. They only exist to encourage you to become more committed to this life of reckless self-indulgence, right? So, like, my pessimism about the institution, my pessimism about the culture, that is exactly the other side of the coin, where I look at these people, whether it's James Aspie or Ali Hardesty or so many others, and it's like, look, there is a better person you could be today if you'd made the same decisions I was making just 5 years ago. Like, think about who you would be today, intellectually, ethically, and emotionally. Who would you be today if 5 years ago you started living the way I live? You can't think the way I think because you don't live the way I live. You can't do what I do because you don't live the way I live. And it's not overnight. I mean, 5 years is a good span of time. And then still today, now I look ahead to the next 5 years. There is this better person you could become, right? If you started living this life, if you started challenging yourself in this way. And I can't say that about weightlifting. I can't say that about yoga. And that's all that anyone fucking says. If only you started doing yoga, if only you started doing weightlifting, you could have a better shape ass. Like, that's it. You could have a more appealing body. If only you started doing yoga or you started working out at the gym. I can't say that to you. I have to say to you, 95% of people who work their ass off at the gym in the next 5 years are still going to be ugly 5 years from now. They're going to be an incremental change in their appearance. Some of them are going to get worse. Some of them are going to get fatter. A lot of people fail on their fucking transformation journey. Or they get better looking, but it just doesn't matter. There's no meaningful change in their life, intellectually, ethically, or emotionally, or it doesn't even lead to them sleeping with a better caliber of person. You put in all this fucking work into the shape of your ass, and what do you get out of it? Jack shit. Fucking Kristen Leo starts getting Botox injections in her face, starts getting plastic surgery. Now you look like a plastic surgery hag. You look older. You look uglier. You look shallower. You look vainer. It doesn't bring a better man into your life. And to some extent, frankly, she has psychological problems. It doesn't overcome your immaturity, your lack of intellectual development, neither in terms of like economics and politics and that stuff, nor in terms of your sexuality, how you relate to men and what kind of relationships you have. It doesn't help you in any of those ways. Like, my optimism that people can be leading a more meaningful life is completely coeval with. It's the other side of the coin with the assessment that the vast majority of people are leading meaningless lives, that they're performing way below their intellectual potential. Now, some of you can't relate to what I'm saying. Some of you are going to say that you were on a university campus the other day and you felt you were surrounded by brilliant, highly motivated people of all ages, inspirational researchers, and people who want to make the world a better place, and people who are trying to develop their own mindset. Maybe that's your subjective experience, whether accurate or delusional, after visiting a university campus in your hometown. Think about Egypt. Think about people who are born and raised in Egypt today, male and female, this horrible repressive religion, where actually a lot of your time and energy goes into the conflict between different ideas about what that religion should be, sectarian divisions within Islam, right? Like a lot of your time and energy, right? Sexually repressive religion, intellectually repressive religion. And now you're walking around a university campus in Egypt. These people have a lot of intellectual potential, right? I've known Muslims, my whole life. You can meet intellectual Muslims, and of course you think, hey, you could be leading a more meaningful life. There's a better life than mine. But in their case, it's not lifting weights at the gym. It's not yoga. It's not alcohol. It's not watching sports on TV. Probably could be watching sports. But it's not the particular model of the self-indulgent life that dominates on an American university campus. There's a very different, meaningless life that dominates on an Egyptian university campus, right? So I think all of you can relate to right away if you're walking around a university campus in Egypt. There's a lot of intellectual potential here that's going to waste. There's a lot that's being squandered.